Between 1929 and 1933, roughly 25% of all Americans lost their jobs, over 9,000 banks collapsed, and entire nations fell into economic ruin from a financial disaster that spread like wildfire across continents. The crash was swift and merciless, but for those caught in its grip, life somehow continued in the shadow of economic devastation. Here's what life was really like during the Great Depression. Hey, quick thing before we start. If you actually listen to these regularly, hit like or subscribe. I always wonder where everyone's at, so comment your city and what time it is. Weird to think some of you are having breakfast in London while I'm recording this at night here in the States. Alright, tonight it's the Great Depression, but before we go anywhere, get comfortable. Seriously, adjust those pillows, pull up that blanket, because where we're going, you're going to want to be cozy. Your eyes snap open to darkness. The room is ice cold. October in New York, 1929, and coal for heating is already being rationed in your building. Your stomach growls painfully, not like the mild hunger when you skip lunch. This is day 3 without a proper meal hunger, the kind that makes your body literally start to consume itself. You're not sleeping on the street, not yet, but the mattress beneath you is thin and lumpy, nothing like your comfortable bed right now. Your apartment is small, but it's shelter. For how much longer, though? That's the question keeping you up at night. 3 days ago, you had a decent job at a factory. 3 days ago, you had savings. 3 days ago, the stock market was riding high and America was prosperous. Then came Black Thursday. The thing about economic disasters is they happen in slow motion and all at once. It's like watching a train wreck from inside the train. For years, people had been pouring money into stocks, borrowing cash to buy more stocks, using those stocks as collateral to borrow even more. It was basically a nationwide pyramid scheme, and on October 24th, 1929, the whole thing came crashing down. Extra, extra. The paperboy's voice cuts through the morning fog as you walk to the employment office. Stock market collapses, worst crash in history. You remember yesterday's scenes outside the New York Stock Exchange, men in expensive suits with blank expressions. The wealthy jumping from buildings isn't just a myth, it actually happened. Not in the numbers people imagine, but enough that ambulance crews were kept busy scraping the remains of once wealthy brokers off the pavement. "Did you hear about George?" one man whispers to another in the growing unemployment line. "Lost everything. His wife found him in the garage with the car running. At least he had a car," the other man replies. The unemployment office is chaos. Hundreds of people, maybe thousands, all fighting for the same few jobs. The man behind the counter looks exhausted, his eyes bloodshot. "Nothing today," he tells you without looking up. "Try again tomorrow." But tomorrow will be the same, and the day after, and the day after that. Wait, I need you to understand what this actually felt like. This wasn't just a bad day in the stock market. This was the entire economic system of the United States, the richest country on earth, completely collapsing. Imagine every financial certainty in your life vanishing overnight. The market will recover, the newspapers say. President Herbert Hoover makes reassuring statements. Prosperity is just around the corner, but you're not stupid. You can see the truth with your own eyes. On your way home, you pass a bank. There's a crowd outside, growing larger by the minute, people pounding on the locked doors, some crying, others shouting, a bank run. When people lose faith in banks, they all rush to withdraw their money at once. But here's the thing about banks in 1929. They don't keep all your money on hand. They lend it out. So when everyone wants their cash at the same time, the bank fails. "They can't just keep our money," a woman screams, her face red with anger. "That's my life savings in there." But they can, and they did. Between 1930 and 1933, nearly half of all American banks failed. If your money was in one of them, it was just gone. No FDIC insurance, no government bailout, just gone. You know what's really wild? Before the crash, the economy seemed unstoppable. The roaring 20s were exactly that. Roaring with excess, jazz, illegal booze during Prohibition, and money that seemed to multiply like magic in the stock market. 10 grand, your neighbor had boasted last month. Started with just $500 last year. The market only goes up, friend. Only goes up. He jumped from his 10th floor apartment 2 days after the crash. By evening, you're back in your apartment, counting the money you have left. $6.17. The rent is due in a week. $5. That leaves $1 and change for food to last. Well, until you find work, whenever that might be. You think about your parents back in Chicago. Could you move back home? The thought makes your stomach twist with shame. 30 years old and crawling back to your parents, but shame doesn't fill an empty stomach. On the street below, a commotion draws you to the window. A family is being evicted, their furniture, clothes, and personal belongings thrown carelessly onto the sidewalk. The mother is crying, clutching a baby to her chest. The father stands motionless, his expression blank with shock. 2 small children cling to their mother's skirt, confused and frightened. This scene is playing out all across America. By 1932, thousands of families will be evicted every day in major cities. The next morning, you join what people are starting to call a bread line. Hundreds of people waiting for free soup and a piece of bread from a charity kitchen. The line stretches around the block. You take your place at the end, swallowing your pride. This is survival now. "First time?" asks the man in front of you, not unkindly. You nod. "You'll get used to it," he says. "Was a bank manager myself before all this. Now look at me." He gestures to his threadbare coat and worn shoes. That's the thing about the Depression that's hard to understand now. It wasn't just the poor who suffered. The middle class was decimated. People who thought they were secure, professionals, managers, skilled workers, suddenly found themselves destitute. "The thing is," the former bank manager continues, "nobody's immune. I had customers, millionaires on paper, who lost everything in a day. One fella came in to withdraw $1 million. By the time we closed that afternoon, his stocks weren't worth the paper they were printed on." The soup, when you finally get it after 3 hours of waiting, is thin and flavourless. The bread is stale, but it's food. You wolf it down, trying not to think about when you'll eat again. Back in your apartment, you turn on the radio, one luxury you've maintained. President Hoover is speaking, assuring the nation that the economy is fundamentally sound, that prosperity will return. "He's full of shit," says your neighbour through the thin wall. "Sorry for the language," he adds, probably remembering your shared wall. "No, you're right," you call back. This casual conversation through the wall has become your main social interaction. "Got any coffee?" he asks. "Just the grounds from yesterday, already used them twice." "Bring 'em over, I'll show you how to get a third cup out of them." And this is how people survived. Sharing, stretching, making do. Coffee grounds used multiple times. Soup made from ketchup and hot water. Clothing mended and remended until the original fabric was more patch than garment. The crazy part, the stores were full of food. The problem wasn't supply. It was that people had no money to buy anything. Farmers were destroying crops because prices had fallen so low it wasn't worth bringing them to market, while people in cities were starving. In Iowa, farmers poured milk onto highways rather than sell it for pennies. In California, oranges rotted in vast piles while children in New York developed diseases from malnutrition. It's one of history's cruelest ironies. Starvation amidst plenty. The next day brings rumours that the stock market is recovering. People are hopeful again. Maybe this will all blow over quickly. Maybe Hoover is right about prosperity being just around the corner. You hear of a factory across town that might be hiring. You spend your precious pennies on a trolley fare, only to find hundreds of men already waiting when you arrive. Some have been there since dawn. They're taking applications, one man tells you, but they've got 20 spots and there must be 500 of us here. You wait anyway. What choice do you have? By noon, a factory foreman comes out. No more jobs today, he shouts. Try again next week. The crowd's disappointment is palpable, a wave of despair washing over hundreds of faces. Men turn away, shoulders slumped, shuffling back to wherever they came from. But one man doesn't move. That's it, he shouts. We wait all morning and that's it? The foreman ignores him, turning to go back inside. My kids are hungry, the man screams, his voice breaking. My kids haven't eaten in 2 days. Other men join in now, their voices rising in anger and desperation. For a moment, it feels like the crowd might rush the factory gates. There's a dangerous energy building, the kind that precedes violence. You back away. You've heard about riots breaking out in other cities, hungry, desperate people looting grocery stores and warehouses. You don't want to be part of that, but you understand it now. Hunger does things to people. It strips away civilization, reduces humans to their most basic instincts. Your own empty stomach has been teaching you this lesson. You find yourself walking past neighborhoods you'd never normally enter, the wealthy areas, the homes with lights still on, cars still in driveways, smoke still curling from chimneys, the people who survived the crash or even profited from it, buying stocks at rock-bottom prices. The divide between rich and poor existed before the crash, but now it's a canyon, gaping and impossible to ignore. Here's something wild about economic depressions. They're not equal opportunity disasters. While millions were plunged into poverty, others barely noticed. The truly wealthy, old money, not the nouveau riche who gambled everything on stocks, continued much as before. Their servants might have accepted lower wages, their portfolios might have taken a hit, but they weren't standing in bread lines. Walking back to your apartment, you pass a Hooverville, one of the shanty towns springing up in cities across America, named mockingly after the president who seemed unable or unwilling to address the crisis. Makeshift shelters cobbled together from scrap wood, cardboard, tin sheets. Whatever people could find. Entire families living in conditions you wouldn't keep animals in. You wonder how many of those people had normal lives just weeks ago. 2 children play in the dirt outside one of the shacks using sticks and rocks as toys. They're thin, their clothes dirty and too small, but they're laughing. Children adapt. Somehow they find joy even in the darkest circumstances. The next morning brings news that reverberates through the city like a thunderclap. The stock market, which had been recovering slightly, has crashed again. Any hope of a quick resolution to the crisis vanishes. You think about that neighbour who boasted of his market gains, the one who jumped. You understand him better now. A week passes, your rent comes due. The landlord, a man named Gianelli, who's always been fair in the past, knocks on your door. I know things are tough, he says, not meeting your eyes. But I got the bank breathing down my neck. If I don't collect, I lose the building. You hand over your $5, leaving yourself with just over $1 for how long? You don't know. Thanks, he says, pocketing the money. Then, unexpectedly, he pulls out a paper bag. My wife made extra stew, said to give it to you. The simple kindness brings tears to your eyes. You're too choked up to speak, so you just nod your thanks. That night, as you savour each bite of the stew, actual meat, vegetables, flavour, you listen to the radio. The news is spreading beyond America now. The economic disaster isn't contained. It's jumping borders, crossing oceans. In Germany, already struggling under the weight of war reparations from the Treaty of Versailles, banks are failing. In Britain, unemployment is soaring. The global economy is interconnected in ways people barely understood until it all began to unravel. You think about your job at the factory, making parts that were shipped overseas. The factory closed because orders dried up. Those orders dried up because companies in other countries were failing. Those companies were failing because their customers had no money. And round it goes, a perfect circle of economic destruction. The stew is gone too quickly. You use bread to wipe the bowl clean, not wasting a drop. Then you lie back on your bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering what tomorrow will bring. Outside, the city that never sleeps has taken on a different rhythm. Not the frenetic energy of prosperity, but the restless stirring of worry, of hunger, of fear. In just a few short weeks, the world has changed completely, and the depression is only just beginning. What's happening in America is just the first tremor. The economic earthquake will soon shake the entire world, toppling governments, birthing extremist movements, redrawing the map of global power. In Germany, a political party that garnered only 2.6% of the vote in 1928 will soon find fertile ground for their message among the unemployed and desperate. Their leader, a failed artist with a talent for channeling anger, will rise on the tide of economic misery. In Britain, the pound sterling, once the world's most stable currency, will be forced off the gold standard, a humiliation for a nation that prided itself on financial strength. In Japan, military leaders will point to the economic crisis as proof that their nation must expand, must secure resources and markets by force if necessary. But all of that is still to come. For now, in late 1929, there is just the dawning realization that the prosperity of the Roaring Twenties was built on sand. The party is over, the bill has come due, and ordinary people, millions upon millions of them, are the ones who will pay it. As you drift towards sleep, your empty stomach growling, you wonder how long this can last. Surely things will improve soon, the government will step in, the economy will recover, life will return to normal. But deep down, this isn't a temporary setback. This is something new, something vast and terrible. This is the Great Depression, and it's just getting started. You've made it to 1930 somehow. The winter was brutal, not just the cold, but the grinding uncertainty of each day. Every morning, the same question. Will I eat today? Your apartment is gone now. Couldn't make rent after December. You're staying at the YMCA when you can scrape together 15 cents for a bed on park benches when you can't. Central Park has become an unofficial campground for the newly homeless. At night, if you squint, the clusters of makeshift shelters almost look like a festival. Almost. "Morning, Professor," says Joe, nodding as you emerge from your spot beneath a cluster of pine trees. Joe was a construction worker before the crash. Now he's the unofficial mayor of this section of the park. He calls everyone Professor, regardless of their former occupation. "Any leads today?" you ask, stretching your stiff limbs. "Heard they're hiring at the docks. Just day labour, but it's something." You nod your thanks and head toward the harbour. The docks are always worth checking, though the competition for work is fierce. 500 men might show up for 20 spots unloading cargo, if there's even cargo to unload. International trade is drying up fast. The scene at the docks is exactly as you expected, a sea of desperate men. Some have been dockhands all their lives, their bodies shaped by years of lifting and hauling. Others, like you, are newcomers to this world, former office workers and shopkeepers. The foreman appears at 6 sharp. "Need 20 today," he shouts above the murmur of the crowd. The press of bodies is immediate, everyone surging forward. You're caught in the middle, pushed and pulled. Someone's elbow catches your ribs. Another man steps on your foot, but you keep moving forward. The foreman points randomly. You. Each man selected quickly steps aside, relief washing over their faces. By some miracle, you're chosen. Maybe it's because you've managed to keep your clothes relatively clean. Maybe it's just dumb luck. Either way, you're working today. The work is brutal, unloading crates from a ship that's come in from South America. Coffee mostly. The irony isn't lost on you. You haven't tasted real coffee in months, making do with reused grounds or chicory substitutes. Now you're handling crates of the stuff, worth more than you'll earn in a month. "Slow boat," comments one of the veteran dockhands during a rare break. "Usually 3 ships a week from Brazil, now maybe 1. "Why's that?" you ask, gulping water from a communal bucket. "Tariffs," he spits. "Goddamn smoot, Hawley. President signed it last month, raised taxes on imports to protect American jobs. But you know what happens when we tax their goods? They tax ours back," you reply. "Bingo, Professor. He doesn't know Joe calls you that too. So now nobody's buying, nobody's selling, and we're all screwed 6 ways from Sunday." The Smoot-Hawley tariff. You'd read about it in the papers. Over 1,000 economists had signed a petition begging President Hoover not to sign it. But Congress pushed it through and Hoover caved. Now international trade, already wounded by the crash, was being strangled by protectionist policies. By noon, your back is screaming and your hands are raw, but you've earned $1, a whole dollar for 6 hours of back-breaking labour. 5 years ago, you'd have scoffed at such wages. Today, it feels like winning the lottery. Same time tomorrow, you ask the foreman as he hands you your pay. He shakes his head. Ships unloaded, nothing else scheduled this week. And just like that, you're unemployed again. You use a nickel to ride the subway uptown, not towards Central Park, but to Grand Central Station. You've made a decision. New York is dying. Time to try somewhere else. The station is both busy and eerily quiet. People move with purpose, but there's a hushed quality, as if everyone's afraid to make too much noise. The giant departures board clacks as it updates. You scan for the cheapest destinations. Chicago? Your parents are there, but the shame of returning home is still too much. Cleveland, Pittsburgh, more industrial cities, probably suffering just as much as New York. Then you see it, Kansas City, the heart of farming country. Surely farmers are still doing okay. People always need to eat, right? And the ticket is just $8.75. You can almost afford it with your day's wages. You approach the ticket counter. "When's the next train to Kansas City?" "8:15 tonight," says the bored-looking clerk. "I'll take it." You count out your money carefully, almost all of your dollar from today, plus most of your meager savings. You're left with 45 cents to your name, but you have a ticket out. The train is crowded, mostly with people leaving the city rather than coming to it. You find a seat next to an elderly man reading a newspaper. "Heading west?" he asks, folding his paper. "Kansas City," you reply. "Thought I might find work on the farms." He gives you a look that's half pity, half amusement. "Might want to rethink that plan, son." He hands you his newspaper, folded to show a headline, "Dust storms ravage plains, crops destroyed." The article describes apocalyptic scenes across Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas. Years of over-farming combined with drought have turned the topsoil to dust. Massive clouds of it sweeping across the plains, burying farms and towns. "Been farming outside Wichita for 40 years, the old man says. "Never seen anything like it. Dust gets into everything. Your clothes, your food, your lungs. Can't grow a damn thing. So why are you going back?" you ask. "It's still home," he says simply. "Where else would I go?" You stare out the window as the train rumbles west, watching America roll by. The countryside should be beautiful in June, but instead it looks tired, neglected. Abandoned cars rust by the roadside. Farms sit empty, fields untended. You fall asleep eventually, lulled by the rhythm of the train. When you wake, the landscape has changed. Flatter now, the Great Plains stretching to the horizon, but the sky has a strange colour, brownish, hazy. Dust, says your companion, noticing your confused expression. We're getting close. Kansas City, when you arrive, is coated in a fine layer of brown. It's on the buildings, the streets, the few cars that move slowly through the haze. People wear bandanas over their faces as they walk. Some have goggles to protect their eyes. You pull your shirt up over your nose as you step off the train. The dust immediately coats your tongue, gritty and dry. "Oh, first time in dust country?" asks a porter, noticing your reaction. You get used to it, or you leave. Your plan to find farm work is clearly dead on arrival. If farmers can't even grow crops, they sure as hell aren't hiring. But you're here now with 45 cents and no return ticket. The porter seems to read your mind. If you're looking for work, try the rail yards. They're always needing men to clean the engines. Dust gets in the machinery. The rail yards are on the edge of town, a sprawling complex of tracks, roundhouses and repair sheds. You find the foreman's office easily enough. "Got experience with trains?" he asks, not looking up from his paperwork. "Quick learner," you offer. He sighs, finally meeting your eyes. Everyone's a quick learner these days. Got hundreds of quick learners looking for work. You're about to turn away when he adds, "But I need someone right now. Engine 4522 came in caked with dust. Needs to be cleaned before it seizes up completely. Pays 30 cents an hour. It's less than the docks in New York, but it's something. I'll take it." The work is even worse than unloading coffee. You're squeezed into the cramped spaces of a locomotive, scrubbing dust from every surface, every gear, every pipe. The air is thick with it, despite the bandana over your face. Your eyes sting, your throat burns. By day's end, you're filthy, exhausted, and have earned a grand total of $2.40. The foreman seems satisfied with your work. "Come back tomorrow," he says. "Got 3 more engines need cleaning." You find a boarding house that charges 50 cents a night. It's cleaner than the YMCA in New York at least. You use some of your earnings to buy dinner at a cheap diner. Actual hot food, the first real meal you've had in weeks. The diner is half empty, but those who are there seem to be railroad men. Their conversations revolve around reduced schedules, routes being cut. "Passenger service to Denver's being suspended," one says. "Not enough riders to justify the run." "Freight to Chicago's down 60%, adds another. "Used to be 6 trains daily. Now it's 2, and they're half empty. The railroads were America's arteries, carrying goods and people across the continent. Now they're clotting, slowing, failing. Another symptom of the economic disease spreading through the nation." You work at the rail yards for a week, cleaning engines and eventually helping with simple repairs. The dust is a constant enemy, working its way into everything, but the pay is steady and you're able to save a little. On Sunday, your day off, you explore Kansas City. The downtown is a mix of beautiful Art Deco buildings and emptied storefronts. Roughly a third of businesses appear closed. For rent and going out of business signs paper the windows. A small crowd has gathered outside a bank. Your stomach drops. Another bank run. But as you get closer, you realize it's not that. The bank is already closed permanently. People are just standing there, staring at the locked doors, as if willing them to open. "Had my life savings in there," says a woman, noticing your gaze. 28 years of careful saving. Gone. "They didn't give you anything?" you ask. She gives a bitter laugh. 10 cents on the dollar. My $6,000 became $600, not even enough to pay off my mortgage. You do the math in your head. That's more money than you've ever had, and it vanished overnight. What will you do? You ask. She shrugs. My sister's in St. Louis, says I can stay with her. Better than the street, I guess. By August, the dust storms are getting worse. Some days the sky turns completely black at noon, as if night has fallen early. People call them black blizzards. The dust is so thick it suffocates livestock in the fields. Children die from dust pneumonia, their lungs filled with dirt. The railroad work begins to dry up. Cutting back, the foreman tells you, can only offer 3 days a week now. It's not enough to live on. You need another plan. You hear rumours that California is better off. The farms in the Central Valley are still producing. There's work picking fruit, harvesting vegetables. You've met several families heading that way, packing everything they own onto ancient cars and trucks. Go west, young man, jokes a fellow railroad worker, quoting Horace Greeley, though California ain't what it used to be either. You consider it. Your savings from the railroad work would buy a bus ticket to Los Angeles, but something holds you back. Maybe it's caution, maybe it's fear of the unknown, or maybe it's the stories you've heard. California police stationed at the state borders, turning away undesirables without proof of employment or sufficient funds. Instead, you decide to head south. Texas, Louisiana, the Gulf Coast, warmer climates where winter won't be as threatening. The bus ride to Houston takes 2 days. You arrive with sore muscles and 632 to your name. The city is bustling compared to Kansas City. The oil industry has cushioned the blow somewhat, though even here the depression's effects are visible. You find work at the docks again, this time loading cotton onto ships bound for England. It's seasonal work. The cotton harvest has just come in, but the pay is decent. 45 cents an hour, 10-hour days. You can actually save money. The boarding house you find is full of men like you, drifters, workers following jobs wherever they appear. The conversations at dinner each night are a catalogue of America's suffering. Spent the spring in Detroit, says a wiry man named Frank. Auto plants all but shut down. Ford went from 5-day work weeks to 3. People living in the factories because they got nowhere else to go. Chicago's worse, adds another. Tried to get work at the stockyards. They're killing cattle by the thousands. Government buying them just to prop up prices. Perfectly good beef being destroyed while people starve. A pattern emerges in these stories, the disconnect between abundance and scarcity, farmers ploughing under crops they can't sell while city dwellers go hungry, factories sitting idle while their products are desperately needed, money concentrated in banks and corporate coffers while ordinary people have none. One night, a new arrival joins the dinner table. His name is Klaus, a German immigrant who'd been working as an engineer in Pennsylvania until the steel mills closed. America bad now? Yes, he says in accented English. But Europe, he makes a gesture like an explosion, much worse. He tells you about his family back in Berlin. His brother, an accountant, lost his job when German banks began failing in the spring. The unemployment rate in Germany is over 30% now. People are literally starving in the streets. Government does nothing, Klaus says. Too weak. People getting angry, looking for someone to blame. Who do they blame, you ask? Klaus's expression darkens. Jews, mostly. Communists. Foreigners, easy targets. There's a party, he continues, National Socialists, Nazis, they call them, very small before, now growing. Their leader, Hitler, he tells people he will make Germany strong again. Fix economy. Give people jobs, food. And people believe him, you ask. Klaus nods grimly. When you are hungry, when your children cry from empty stomachs, you believe anyone who promises food. The global connections become clearer to you now. The economic disaster that began on Wall Street is reshaping politics around the world. In Italy, Mussolini's fascist regime is consolidating power. In Japan, the military is gaining influence, pushing for expansion to secure resources. In Germany, an obscure political party is finding fertile ground for its message of hatred and resentment. The cotton season ends, and with it your dock work in Houston, but you've saved enough, almost $100, to give yourself a cushion while you look for the next opportunity. December finds you in New Orleans, working odd jobs on the riverfront. The weather is mild compared to the northern winter, and the city has a vibrancy that seems to defy the national mood. Music still spills from clubs along Basin Street, though the audiences are smaller, the tips less generous. You've become part of America's new nomadic class, following seasonal work, moving when opportunities dry up, living in boarding houses and flop houses, occasionally sleeping rough when necessary. Your possessions fit in a single knapsack. You've learned to travel light, both physically and emotionally. The radio brings news from Washington. President Hoover continues to resist direct federal intervention in the economy, believing that voluntary efforts by business leaders and private charities will eventually turn things around. The bastard just doesn't get it, says your roommate, a former bank teller from Omaha. People are dying out here, actual children starving to death in the richest country on earth, and he's talking about rugged individualism. Hoover has become a national villain, his name a bitter joke. Newspapers used to wrap around oneself for warmth are Hoover blankets. Empty pockets turned inside out are Hoover flags. The shantytowns sprouting in every city are Hoovervilles. On Christmas Day 1930, you allow yourself a small splurge. Dinner at a real restaurant with tablecloths and waiters in bow ties. It costs nearly $1, an extravagance that would have been unthinkable a year ago. But you've survived when so many others haven't. That seems worth celebrating. The restaurant is half empty. Those who are dining seem subdued, the usual holiday cheer muted. At a nearby table, a family, mother, father, 2 children, bow their heads in prayer before eating. Their clothes are well made but worn, the kind of outfits people wear when they're maintaining appearances despite reduced circumstances. "Thank you, Lord, for this food," the father says quietly, "and for the blessing of being together when so many families are separated by hardship." You think about your own parents in Chicago. You've sent them postcards from your various stops but haven't seen them since before the crash. Are they okay? The shame that kept you from returning home seems petty now, a luxury from a different life. The new year brings news that the economic situation is worsening. More banks failing, 1,352 in 1930 alone. Unemployment climbing toward 15%. And still, Hoover resists direct federal relief, believing it would undermine American self-reliance. In Europe, the situation is even more dire. The failure of Austria's largest bank, Credit Anstalt, has triggered a financial panic across the continent. Germany, already struggling under war reparations, is watching its banking system collapse. Klaus's letters from Berlin grow increasingly alarming. People are turning to extremist parties, communists on the left, Nazis on the right. Street battles between political factions are becoming common. His last letter ended with a chilling observation: "Democracy dying here. Be grateful for American stability, even now." But how stable is America, really? There are rumblings of discontent everywhere. Veterans demanding early payment of their service bonuses, farmers destroying crops rather than sell at ruinous prices, workers striking despite the risk of unemployment. In February 1931, you're in Baton Rouge when you witness something that shakes your faith in American resilience. A food riot. Hundreds of desperate people storming a grocery warehouse, overwhelming the guards, taking what they need, not stealing luxury items or cash, just flour, sugar, beans, the basics of survival. The police response is brutal. Clubs swinging, tear gas deployed. You watch from a distance, heart pounding, as people are dragged away, bloodied and handcuffed. Later, in a cheap diner, you overhear two policemen discussing the riot. "Never thought I'd see Americans behaving like that," one says, shaking his head. "Like animals." "Hunger makes animals of us all," replies his partner. "My sister's kids haven't had milk in months. If I wasn't on the force, might have been me in that warehouse." The first officer looks shocked. "You saying you sympathize with those looters?" "I'm saying hunger changes the rules. This keeps up, riots will be the least of our worries." His words stay with you as you leave Baton Rouge, heading west again. Hunger changes the rules. You've seen it yourself. Former bank managers waiting in bread lines. Respectable women selling themselves for food. Children picking through garbage for scraps. The America of 1931 is almost unrecognizable from the prosperous nation of just 2 years ago, and as you board another bus, destination unknown, you wonder what it will look like a year from now. The Depression is no longer a temporary crisis. It's become the new normal. A disaster that's reshaping society, politics, even human behavior, and it's far from over. Across the Atlantic, European nations are falling like dominoes. In London, the pound sterling, once the world's most stable currency, is about to be forced off the gold standard, a humiliation for the British Empire. In Berlin, the Nazi Party is gaining seats in the Reichstag, its message of economic nationalism and racial scapegoating finding an audience among the desperate and disillusioned. In Japan, military leaders are making the case for expansion, arguing that the economic crisis proves Japan must secure resources and markets abroad, by force if necessary. The Great Depression isn't just an American tragedy, it's a global catastrophe that will ultimately reshape the world order, leading to conflicts and realignments that will define the 20th century. But on a Greyhound bus crossing Louisiana in the spring of 1931, all of that seems distant, academic. For now, there's just the road ahead, the next job, the next meal. Survival in a world turned upside down. The bus stops at a small roadside diner. Most passengers can't afford to eat there, but they get off anyway, stretching their legs, using the bathroom. You've budgeted for a cup of coffee, a luxury that still feels worthwhile. Inside, the radio is playing. A news announcer is discussing international financial markets, the cascading bank failures in Central Europe, the pressure on Germany's already fragile economy. Now turning to domestic news, he says, his voice crisp and authoritative. President Hoover continues to express confidence that the economic situation will improve naturally without the need for direct government intervention. The diner's cook snorts derisively. Sure it will, and I'm Mary Pickford. A ripple of bitter laughter runs through the diner. The unity in that moment, strangers bound by shared hardship, shared resentment, is striking. As you board the bus again, a thought occurs to you. Maybe that's the silver lining in all this suffering, the recognition that we're in it together. That the myths of rugged individualism and self-made success are just that. Myths. If America survives this crisis, perhaps it will emerge with a new understanding of shared responsibility, of collective well-being, a recognition that an economy that enriches a few while impoverishing many is neither stable nor just. Or maybe that's just wishful thinking, the desperate hope of someone who's seen too much suffering and needs to believe it serves some purpose. The bus rumbles westward, carrying its cargo of drifters, job seekers, and displaced people, each with their own story, their own losses, their own desperate hopes, a rolling microcosm of an America in crisis, moving always forward, because what else can it do? Summer 1931 finds you in California after all. The rumours of work in the agricultural sector proved too tempting to resist. The bus deposited you in Bakersfield, heart of the Central Valley, where fields of vegetables and fruit orchards stretch to the horizon. Your first impression, the rumours weren't entirely wrong. There is work here, but there's also competition, fierce, desperate competition. Dawn at the hiring lot outside town. Hundreds of people gathered in the grey half-light, waiting for farm trucks to arrive. Men, women, even children ready to work. Many are Okies, refugees from Oklahoma and other Dust Bowl states who fled west with nothing but what they could carry. A truck pulls up and the driver stands in the bed. Need 20 pickers, 1-day job, 5 cents a bucket. The surge forward is immediate, bodies pressing, voices shouting. You're caught in the crush, elbowed and shoved. The driver points randomly. You, not you, not today. 3 more trucks, 3 more chance. Each time the same desperate press, the same arbitrary selection. By the 3rd truck, the mood is turning ugly. They're picking Mexicans over Americans, someone shouts from the back of the crowd. Those are our jobs. Shut your mouth, gringo, responds a weathered man in Spanish-accented English. Been picking here 20 years. You just showed up. Tensions rise, fists clench. The driver of the 3rd truck senses trouble and quickly selects his workers, mostly Mexican, and speeds away. See that. The first voice again. They stick together, these people, take food from American mouths. This is new to you, this targeting of ethnicity, this anger directed horizontally rather than up at those responsible for the economic collapse. But it's becoming increasingly common. When resources are scarce, humans look for someone to blame, someone vulnerable. Someone different. You've seen it in Klaus's letters from Germany, the rising attacks on Jews and foreigners. Now you're seeing it in America's fields. A 4th truck arrives, and this time luck favours you. The driver needs 30 workers, and you're among those selected. You climb into the back, avoiding eye contact with those left behind. The work is strawberry picking, backbreaking labour under the California sun. By noon, your lower back is screaming in protest. By 3, your fingers are stained red and pricked with tiny cuts from the stems. But you work steadily, filling bucket after bucket. 5 cents a bucket. Each one holds about 2 quarts of berries. A fast picker can fill maybe 80 buckets in a day. $4, not bad compared to other work you found, but your body isn't conditioned for this. By day's end, you filled 42 buckets, $2.10 for a day of absolute physical misery. First day's the worst, says an older woman working nearby, noticing your grimace as you straighten up. Gets easier. Been doing this long? You ask. 3 years now. She wipes sweat from her forehead with a bandana. Used to own a farm in Nebraska. Bank took it. Now I pick other people's crops. Her name is Martha. She's in her 50s, skin leathered by sun and hardship. She invites you to the camp where she stays with other agricultural workers. The camp is a revelation. Hundreds of makeshift tents and shacks spread across an open field. No running water, no electricity, no sanitation. Children with distended bellies play in the dirt. Gaunt adults sit in whatever shade they can find, conserving energy for tomorrow's work. "Welcome to the promised land," Martha says with bitter irony. She introduces you to her neighbors, a family from Oklahoma, their 4 children, all under 10, a couple from Arkansas who lost their farm to the bank, a widower from Kansas whose wife died of pneumonia on the journey west. Government man came by last week, says the Oklahoman, a rail-thin man named Earl, taking pictures, asking questions, said he was from some new agency. What did he call it, Dottie? Resettlement Administration, his wife replies, said President Hoover wanted to know about conditions. Hoover can go to hell, Earl spits. 3 years of this, and now he wants to know how we're living. We're dying is how we're living. You spend a week in the strawberry fields, then move on to lettuce, then tomatoes. Your body adapts, muscles hardening, hands callousing. The money isn't great, but it's steady, and food costs less here, so close to the source. Martha becomes something of a mentor. She's been following the harvests up and down California for years now, knows which farms treat workers fairly, which cheat on the weights, which provide water and which don't. Key is to save during peak season, she advises. August through October, you can work every day, then it slows down. By winter, might be only 2-3 days a week. She's built a small community here, not family by blood, but family by circumstance. They share resources, watch each other's children, care for the sick. It's a kind of mutual aid society born of necessity. One night, sitting around a small fire, someone produces a battered radio. The evening news crackles through the speaker. In international news, Great Britain today abandoned the gold standard, allowing the pound sterling to float freely on currency markets. The move comes after weeks of financial pressure and significant outflows of gold from the Bank of England. "What's that mean?" asks one of the children, surprisingly engaged by financial news. "Means even the British Empire's going broke, kid," says Earl. "Whole world's going to hell together." He's not wrong. Britain's abandonment of the gold standard in September 1931 is a seismic event in global finance. The pound sterling, once the world's most stable currency, the bedrock of international trade, is now just another piece of paper subject to market whims. Other countries follow Britain's lead, abandoning gold one by one. The international financial system, already damaged by the Depression, is now fundamentally altered. You hear rumours of work in the Imperial Valley near the Mexican border, better wages, longer season. In October, you and Martha join a caravan of cars and trucks heading south. Your contribution to gas money buys you a spot in the bed of a rusted pickup, your few possessions tucked under the seat. The Imperial Valley is even hotter than Bakersfield, the work just as hard, but the rumours prove true. More consistent employment, slightly better pay. You find yourself picking lettuce alongside workers from Mexico who cross the border daily. This close to the international line, you hear more news about the global situation. Mexico is suffering too, its economy dependent on exports to the US that have largely dried up. Across Latin America, nations that rely on selling coffee, sugar, metals, and other commodities to industrial nations are facing economic collapse. The Mexican workers tell stories of villages where people are literally starving, of desperate attempts to cross into the US for work, of families torn apart by deportation. La Migra came to our camp last month, says Miguel, a young man working next to you. Took everyone without papers. My brother, they sent him back. Now I don't know where he is. The Immigration Service, La Migra, has been conducting raids across California, rounding up Mexican immigrants, even those who've lived in the US for decades. The logic is simple and cruel. Fewer Mexicans means more jobs for real Americans. Never mind that most of these jobs are ones American workers often refuse. Never mind that many of those deported are legal residents, even citizens. Fear and scarcity breed cruelty. Your status as an Okie, though you're actually from New York, offers some protection. You may be poor, you may be homeless, but you're white and American-born. The privileges of those accidents of birth become clearer every day. Another raid. The shout goes up one morning as you're walking to the fields. Border Patrol vehicles roar into the camp. People scatter, running in all directions. You stand your ground, confident in your citizenship, but Martha grabs your arm, pulling you into the brush. Papers don't matter, she hisses. They take everyone, sort it out later, could be days in detention. You watch from hiding as agents round up dozens of workers. Some protest in English, showing papers, proving citizenship. The agents are unmoved. Everyone goes into the trucks. That night, the camp is half empty, families separated, children crying for missing parents. The work crew the next day is similarly depleted, the farmer, furious at losing half his workforce just as the harvest peaks, pays the remaining workers an extra $1 per day. Economics, Martha says, with dark humour. Supply and demand. Fewer workers, higher wages. But the raid has other consequences. Trust is damaged, community bonds frayed, everyone eyes newcomers with suspicion. Are they workers or informants? The solidarity that made survival possible is harder to maintain. By December 1931, you've saved nearly $200, a fortune by current standards. The question is what to do with it. Banks aren't trusted. Carrying cash is dangerous. Many workers send money home to families, but you have no dependents. Martha suggests investment, not in stocks. No one trusts the market anymore, but in tools, skills, something tangible. Man I know in San Diego, she says, teaches auto repair from his garage, $20 for the course, always need mechanics, depression or no. It's an appealing idea, a skill no one can take from you, useful anywhere. You decide to head to San Diego after the Imperial Valley harvest ends. The mechanic's name is Gus, a former Ford factory worker who set up shop when the Detroit plant reduced shifts. His school is just his garage with 2 cars in various states of disassembly. Welcome to the University of Hard Knocks Automotive Division, he jokes when you arrive. There are 3 other students, a teenager who dreams of racing cars, a middle-aged man recently laid off from a shipping company, and a woman in her 30s who plans to take over her father's repair shop. Lady Mechanic, the teenager says with obvious skepticism. She fixes him with a level stare. My dad lost his right arm in France during the war. Been doing most of the work myself for years, just never got the certificate. Gus is an excellent teacher, patient but demanding. For 6 weeks, you learn about engines, transmissions, electrical systems. The work is challenging, satisfying in a way picking crops wasn't. You're building something, not just harvesting what others have planted. San Diego itself is suffering less than many cities. The naval base provides stable employment for thousands. Military budgets, while reduced, haven't been cut as drastically as other sectors. There's a certain irony. The one part of government spending Hoover doesn't slash is defense. Your fellow students become friends. You share meals, stories, hopes for what comes after the depression. The teenager, Jimmy, is the most optimistic. My uncle says it'll turn around this year, he insists one night over beans and rice in Gus's kitchen. Stock market's up from its lows. Banks are more stable. The woman, Rebecca, snorts. Your uncle been saying that since 29? Jimmy flushes. This time's different. Hoover's got new plans. Hoover's a damn fool, says the middle-aged man, Frank, waiting for the natural business cycle to fix things. Meanwhile, people starve. The conversation turns to politics, as it increasingly does everywhere. 1932 is an election year. President Hoover, once hailed as a brilliant administrator and humanitarian for his work feeding Europe after the Great War, is now perhaps the most hated man in America. Who's running against him, you ask? Democrats haven't picked their candidate yet, says Gus. But word is it'll be Roosevelt, governor of New York. Any good? Asks Rebecca. Gus shrugs. Hard to say. Rich man, like all of them, but had polio, can't walk without braces. Maybe suffering teaches compassion. The conversation drifts to news from abroad. Things in Germany are deteriorating rapidly. The Nazi Party is now the second largest in the Reichstag. Hitler came close to winning the presidency, forcing aging war hero Paul von Hindenburg into a runoff. My cousin's husband is Jewish, says Rebecca. They're leaving Berlin, coming to New York, says it's getting dangerous. Why blame Jews for the economy? Jimmy asks, genuinely confused. Doesn't make sense. Sense has nothing to do with it, kid, Frank says. Fear makes people stupid. Scared people want someone to blame. In January 1932, shocking news comes from Asia. Japan has invaded Manchuria, a resource-rich region of northern China. The Imperial Japanese Army, acting without clear authorization from Tokyo, has seized a massive territory and established a puppet state. The world watches, does nothing. The League of Nations issues condemnations, but no concrete actions. Western powers, consumed by their own economic crises, have no appetite for confronting Japan. It's a chilling precedent, aggression unpunished, territorial conquest achieved through force, a lesson that won't be lost on other expansionist powers. Your auto repair course ends in February. Gus gives each student a certificate, homemade but official looking. More importantly, he gives recommendations. Buddy of mine runs a garage in Santa Monica, he tells you. Could use someone with your attention to detail, won't pay much starting out but room to grow. It's the most promising opportunity you've had since the crash, a chance for stable employment, for settling in one place, for beginning to rebuild a life. The bus ride to Los Angeles takes you through landscapes transformed by the Depression. The highways are dotted with hitchhikers, whole families walking with their possessions on their backs, makeshift camps in the roadside woods. Outside the small town of Oceanside, you see a sign that stops your heart. Bonus Army Recruiting Station. Veterans march on Washington. Join up here. The Bonus Army. You've heard about it on the radio. World War veterans, promised a service bonus to be paid in 1945, are demanding early payment due to the Depression. Thousands are planning to march on Washington to pressure Congress. The bus stops briefly in Oceanside. You step off to stretch your legs and approach the recruitment station, just a card table with two aging veterans. You serve? One asks. You shake your head. Just curious. Hell of a thing, he says. Fought for our country. Now we're fighting for what we're owed. Planning to have 20,000 veterans in DC by June. Think it'll work? You ask. He shrugs. Has to. I got kids to feed. Bonus would mean $2,000 for me. Difference between starving and surviving. Back on the bus, you ponder what might happen if the government refuses the veterans' demands. 20,000 trained soldiers, desperate, angry, converging on the capital. Could it lead to revolution, to military coup? America's democratic traditions seem strong, but hunger changes the rules, as that policeman in Baton Rouge said. Los Angeles appears on the horizon, sprawling and hazy. Despite the Depression, it's growing, fueled by the fledgling movie industry and the migration of Dust Bowl refugees. The contrasts are stark. Opulent Beverly Hills mansions visible from Hooverville shantytowns, gleaming new office buildings next to soup kitchens with lines around the block. Your new job at the Santa Monica garage starts poorly. The owner, Hank, is nothing like Gus. Impatient, critical, quick to anger. The pay is lower than promised, 20 cents an hour instead of 30. But it's steady work and you're indoors and your back doesn't ache every night like it did in the fields. You rent a small room in a boarding house near the beach, $5 a week, including breakfast. It's the first real home you've had since leaving your New York apartment in 1930. The other boarders are a mix of the barely employed, a movie studio janitor, a part-time secretary, a night watchman. Everyone's struggling, but they've held on to these threads of normalcy. A roof, a bed, regular meals. One night in April, sitting on the boarding house porch, you witness something that encapsulates the madness of the depression economy. On the beach, city workers are burning oranges, thousands of them piled high and set aflame. The night watchman, Ed, explains, government buys surplus crops to keep prices up, can't give them away. That would drive prices down, so they destroy them. The sheer insanity of it, food being destroyed while people go hungry, leaves you speechless. The economics might make some theoretical sense, but the human reality is obscene. The next day at work, a well-dressed man brings in a brand new Packard for service. While Hank fawns over him, you change the oil, check the belts, top off fluids. It's routine work, but the car itself is a marvel, evidence that not everyone is suffering equally. Movie producer, Hank tells you after the man leaves. They're still making money hand over fist. Seems the worse things get, the more people want to escape to the pictures. It's true. Despite or because of the Depression, Americans are flocking to cinemas. For a quarter, they can forget their troubles for 2 hours, lose themselves in glamour and adventure and romance. The movie industry is one of the few thriving sectors of the economy. That weekend, flush with your weekly pay, you treat yourself to a film, Public Enemy, starring James Cagney. The theatre is packed, the audience raucous, when Cagney's gangster character rises from poverty to wealth through crime. Some in the crowd cheer. The moral comeuppance at the end is met with boos. It's another sign of changing attitudes. Pre-crash, such a reaction would have been unthinkable. Now, traditional notions of morality are bending under economic pressure. If banks can steal life savings, if governments can burn food while children starve, why shouldn't an ordinary man turn to crime? May brings news that the bonus army is growing larger than expected. Veterans from across the country are converging on Washington, building a massive encampment. President Hoover refuses to meet with them. Congress debates the bonus bill half-heartedly. The boarding house gets a new resident, a journalist named Helen, who works for a small left-wing newspaper. Her stories focus on labor disputes, union organizing, the conditions in worker camps. At dinner each night, she shares news that doesn't make the mainstream press. Steel workers in Pennsylvania just called a strike, she announces one evening. 5,000 men. Company brought in armed guards. There's going to be violence. Cops or National Guard? Asks Ed. Both, Helen says grimly. Governors in the company's pocket. This too is becoming commonplace. State power deployed to break strikes, protect property, maintain an economic order that's failing most Americans. The facade of neutrality is wearing thin. In June, shocking news arrives from Washington. The Senate has rejected the bonus bill. The bonus army camps remain, growing larger and more permanent. The veterans vow to stay until they receive justice. Helen returns from a reporting trip to the Imperial Valley, where you worked months earlier. They're organizing, she says excitedly. Farm workers, both Mexican and American, demanding higher wages, better conditions. It's unprecedented. Won't last, says Ed. They'll just bring in the cops, break it up. Maybe, Helen acknowledges, but something's changing. People aren't afraid anymore. What's the worst that can happen? Poverty? They're already there. She's right. Across America, a new militancy is emerging. Coal miners in Kentucky, auto workers in Michigan, textile workers in Massachusetts, strikes and organizing drives are spreading despite violent opposition from employers and authorities. The Depression is entering its fourth year. The initial shock has worn off. The hope for quick recovery has died. What remains is a grim determination, a growing anger, a radical questioning of the system itself. In your small room, you sometimes take out the dollar bills from your weekly pay and stare at them. These pieces of paper, once so reliable, have been revealed as fragile constructs, their value dependent on collective faith that has been severely shaken. If money can evaporate overnight, if work doesn't guarantee survival, if governments burn food while people starve, what other certainties might prove false? What other foundational assumptions might crumble? These are the questions being asked across America, across the world, as the Great Depression grinds on, and the answers, when they come, will reshape global politics, economics and society for decades to come. The old order is dying. What will replace it remains uncertain. But in boarding houses and Hoovervilles, in farm fields and factory floors, in the corridors of power and the back rooms of radical politics, the future is being negotiated, fought over, born in pain and possibility. And you, like millions of others, are caught in this historical current, swept along by forces beyond individual control, trying simply to stay afloat while the world transforms around you. July 1932 brings news that stops conversations mid-sentence. President Hoover has ordered the US Army to clear the bonus army from Washington. Your boarding house gathers around the radio, listening in stunned silence as the announcer describes tanks rolling down Pennsylvania Avenue, cavalry charging with sabers drawn, infantry advancing with bayonets fixed, all against unarmed veterans, many with wives and children. Jesus Christ, whispers Ed, the night watchman. They're using gas against their own soldiers. The details are horrific. Troops commanded by General Douglas MacArthur, against direct orders, pursued the veterans across the Anacostia River and burned their camp to the ground. 2 veterans killed, dozens wounded, including a 12-week-old baby who died from tear gas exposure. "This is how republics die," says Helen, the journalist, her voice shaking with anger, "when armies march on citizens." That night, none of you sleep well. The radio keeps broadcasting updates, each more disturbing than the last. Photos in the next day's papers show Washington in flames, American soldiers attacking American veterans, families fleeing with whatever possessions they could grab. "This will end Hoover," predicts your landlady at breakfast. "No coming back from this." She's right. The bonus army attack becomes a political catastrophe for an already unpopular president. With the election just months away, Herbert Hoover, once regarded as a humanitarian genius for feeding starving Europeans after the Great War, has cemented his image as callous and cruel. Franklin Roosevelt, the Democratic nominee, doesn't need to attack Hoover directly. The contrast speaks for itself, Roosevelt promising a New Deal for the American people, while Hoover sends tanks against hungry veterans. Work at the garage continues, though business is slow. Fewer people can afford cars, and those who have them put off repairs as long as possible. Hank cuts your hours, then your wages. By August, you're making barely enough to cover your room and board. But you're luckier than most. At least 25% of Americans are completely unemployed. Millions more work reduced hours for reduced pay. Homelessness has reached unprecedented levels. Entire families living in parks, under bridges, in makeshift shanty towns. The presidential campaign dominates conversation. Roosevelt's promises of direct federal action, jobs programs, banking reform, support for farmers spark hope. But there's skepticism too. "Rich man born with a silver spoon," says Frank, a fellow mechanic at the garage. "What does he know about suffering?" "He knows about disability," counters Helen. "Man can barely walk from polio. That changes your perspective." One evening, Helen brings a guest to dinner. A German journalist named Werner, who's reporting on the American Depression for newspapers back home. His observations are chilling. "What happens here is mirrored in Germany, but worse," he explains. "Our unemployment is 30%, maybe higher. Inflation destroyed savings years ago. Now this depression destroys everything else." "And Hitler?" someone asks. Werner's face darkens. "Rising. Nazis now largest party in Reichstag. Not majority, but plurality. Hitler demands to be chancellor." "Will it happen?" you ask. "I fear yes. Traditional conservatives think they can control him." Werner gives a bitter laugh, like thinking you can control a tiger once you let it out of its cage. The German situation feels distant, academic almost, compared to the immediate crisis in America. But the connections are becoming clearer. The financial collapse that began on Wall Street in 1929 has destabilized governments worldwide, created openings for extremists, pushed nations toward conflict rather than cooperation. Werner shares stories from other European countries, Britain forcing civil servants to take pay cuts, France struggling with government paralysis, Spain declaring itself a republic after the king fled. Everywhere, the old order is under pressure, cracking, sometimes collapsing. In September, you lose your job at the garage. Hank can't afford to keep 3 mechanics with business so slow. As the newest hire, you're the first cut. He seems genuinely regretful. "Keep your tools," he says gruffly. "Good mechanic like you will find something, but you don't. Not in Los Angeles anyway. The city is flooded with job seekers from the Dust Bowl states, willing to work for almost nothing. After 2 weeks of searching, you face a hard truth. It's time to move again." The question is where. Winter is coming, making the northern states less appealing. The Dust Bowl continues to devastate the plains. California is better than most places, but competition for jobs is fierce. You decide to head east, toward Arizona and New Mexico. There's talk of government projects starting up. Dams, roads, bridges, the kind of heavy construction that needs mechanics to maintain equipment. Before leaving, you write to your parents in Chicago, the first contact in over a year. The letter is brief, apologetic for the silence, assuring them you're surviving, asking about their situation. You leave the boarding house address for any reply. The bus east is half empty, unusual for Depression-era transport. The driver explains why. "Borders closed," he says, during a rest stop in San Bernardino. "Arizona police turning folks back if they don't have money or confirmed jobs, $100 or proof of employment. They can do that? Stop American citizens from entering a state?" The driver shrugs. "Been doing it for months. Call it immigration inspection. Really, they're just keeping out the poor." You count your money. $87, not enough to guarantee passage, but you've learned a few things about survival in these years on the road. At the next stop, you hide most of your cash in your shoe, keeping just $5 in your wallet. If questioned, you'll show your mechanic's certificate, claim you have a job waiting. The border crossing is as described. California Highway Patrol on one side, Arizona officers on the other. They board the bus, checking each passenger. "Business in Arizona?" asks a square-jawed officer when he reaches your seat. "Mechanic," you reply, showing your certificate from Gus's course. "Got work waiting in Phoenix." He eyes you skeptically. "Where at?" You give the name of a garage you saw in a newspaper ad. He seems satisfied. moves on. The man behind you isn't so lucky. No job, only $12 to his name. The officers escort him off the bus. Through the window, you watch him standing forlornly on the roadside as you pull away. Phoenix in October is pleasantly warm after the coastal chill of Los Angeles. The city is suffering, like everywhere, but less severely than some. The surrounding agricultural areas provide some economic cushion. You find work at a construction company maintaining trucks and earth-moving equipment. The pay is decent, 40 cents an hour, and the job relatively secure. The company has contracts for several government projects, including a new dam on the Salt River. The boarding house you find is more basic than the one in Santa Monica, but clean and affordable. Your roommate is a surveyor named Paul who works for the same construction company. Or road projects mostly, he explains when asked what the company builds. Government finally figured out that paying men to build highways beats paying them to do nothing. These aren't formal federal programs, not yet, but state governments, counties and cities are increasingly funding public works to create employment. It's still inadequate, reaching only a tiny fraction of the jobless, but it represents a shift in thinking. As Election Day approaches, the campaign intensifies. Hoover, knowing he's likely to lose, becomes more desperate, warning that Roosevelt's plans amount to socialism, that federal relief will destroy American self-reliance, that only traditional market solutions can restore prosperity. Roosevelt counters with confidence and optimism, promising action instead of ideology. His campaign song, "Happy Days Are Here Again," becomes an anthem of hope. On November 8, 1932, the nation votes. The results are decisive. Roosevelt wins 42 states to Hoover's 6. Democrats take control of both houses of Congress. It's a mandate for change, a repudiation of Hoover's hands-off approach to the crisis. But the election creates a dangerous vacuum. Roosevelt won't take office until March 4, 1933, 4 months away. This gap, later viewed as dangerously long, will lead to the 20th Amendment, moving inauguration to January. For now, a repudiated president remains in office while conditions continue to deteriorate. December brings news from Germany that confirms Werner's fears. President Hindenburg has appointed Adolf Hitler as Chancellor, believing the conservative cabinet will control the Nazi leader. The tiger is out of its cage. Mark my words, says a history professor who stays at your boarding house while visiting Phoenix. This man Hitler will not be controlled. Europe is sleepwalking toward disaster. His words echo in your mind as Christmas 1932 arrives, your 4th since the crash. The holiday is subdued at the boarding house, though someone produces a small tree decorated with homemade ornaments. Everyone contributes to a common dinner, more food than many have seen in months. To 1933, Paul raises a glass of cheap wine. Can't possibly be worse than 32. But it begins worse. In January, news comes that food riots have broken out in several cities. In Iowa, farmers have blocked roads, preventing produce from reaching markets, demanding higher prices. In Detroit, former auto workers have seized a Ford plant, occupying it until police drove them out with tear gas. February brings the attempted assassination of President-elect Roosevelt in Miami. The bullet misses him, but kills Chicago Mayor Anton Cermak. The nation holds its breath. How much more can the system take? Then, just days before Roosevelt's inauguration, the banking system finally collapses completely. Years of pressure, bank runs, failing loans, vanishing reserves culminate in total seizure. Banks across the country close their doors. Currency becomes scarce. Commerce grinds to a halt. your construction company suspends operations. They can't make payroll with banks closed. You're out of work again, though the foreman assures everyone it's temporary, just until the banks sort themselves out, he promises. But no one believes the banks will simply sort themselves out. The financial system that underpins modern capitalism is in cardiac arrest. Only massive intervention can restart it. On March 4th, 1933, the nation gathers around radios to hear Roosevelt's inaugural address. His words crackle through the static. "Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance." The room falls silent as he continues, acknowledging the crisis directly, offering no magic solutions but promising action, immediate, concrete action. "This nation asks for action, and action now. I shall ask the Congress for broad executive power to wage a war against the emergency, as great as the power that would be given to me if we were in fact invaded by a foreign foe." The response is electric. For the first time in years, there is a sense that the government will actually do something, not wait for natural recovery, not protect the interests of banks and businesses at the expense of ordinary people, but take direct action to alleviate suffering. Roosevelt's first act comes immediately, declaring a national bank holiday, closing all financial institutions to prevent further collapse. Then, in a flurry of activity that will become known as the 100 Days, his administration pushes through legislation, creating jobs programs, regulating banks, supporting farmers, establishing a social safety net. The Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, is among the first programs announced. Young men will work on environmental projects, building parks, planting trees, controlling erosion, in exchange for food, housing, and $30 per month, $25 of which must be sent home to their families. Your roommate, Paul, is ecstatic. Finally, someone actually doing something instead of just talking about market corrections and natural cycles. People need jobs. Roosevelt's creating them. Not everyone is pleased. Your landlord, who owns several properties, complains bitterly about socialism and handouts. A banker who boards with you warns of inflation and government overreach. But they're minority voices now. Most Americans, desperate after 4 years of suffering, welcome any change from the status quo. By April, your construction company restarts operations, bolstered by new federal contracts for road building. The work is steady again, the pay reliable. It's not prosperity, not even close, but it's stability, a platform to stand on rather than quicksand. Letters finally arrive from your parents. Their situation in Chicago has been difficult but not desperate. Your father's job as a postal worker provided security when little else did. They're relieved to hear from you, eager for you to visit when possible. The shame that kept you away seems foolish now, a relic from before the crash when individual failure carried stigma. The Depression has taught a different lesson, that economic disaster can strike anyone, that survival depends more on luck and systemic factors than personal virtue or vice. You write back, promising to visit when you can save enough for the journey. For the first time in years, such planning seems reasonable rather than fantasy. May brings news of the Agricultural Adjustment Act designed to raise crop prices by paying farmers to produce less. It's counterintuitive economics, deliberately reducing supply to increase prices, but the alternative has been demonstrated. Bumper crops that farmers can't sell at any profit, food destroyed while people go hungry. The National Industrial Recovery Act follows in June, establishing codes of fair competition, minimum wages, maximum hours. It's an unprecedented government intervention in the economy, directly challenging the laissez-faire approach that dominated American capitalism for generations. Critics call it un-American, unconstitutional, the end of free enterprise. Supporters call it salvation, the necessary evolution of capitalism to save it from its own excesses. History will render complicated verdicts on the New Deal. Some programs will work, others fail, some will be struck down by the Supreme Court, others will become permanent features of American life. But in the moment, in 1933, what matters is that someone is finally acting with urgency and purpose. The sense of abandonment that characterized the Hoover years has been replaced by engagement. The government is no longer a bystander to suffering, but an active participant in relief. By summer, the first cautious signs of recovery appear. Unemployment remains catastrophically high, still over 20%, but no longer rising. Industrial production increases slightly. Bank deposits, protected now by the new Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC, begin to grow as confidence returns. In Germany, meanwhile, Hitler consolidates power with terrifying speed. Opposition parties are banned, trade unions dissolved, a compliant Reichstag passes the Enabling Act, giving Hitler dictatorial powers. Jewish businesses are boycotted, then seized. Book burnings eliminate un-German literature. Letters from Werner, the German journalist, grow increasingly desperate, then stop altogether. Helen learns through colleagues that he's fled to France, part of the first wave of refugees from Nazi persecution. The news from Europe serves as a chilling reminder of what might have happened in America without the pressure valve of democratic change. The same economic disaster that brought Roosevelt to power in the US delivered Germany into Hitler's hands. Different systems, different cultures, different outcomes, but the same underlying cause. In July, you finally have enough saved to consider the trip to Chicago. Paul convinces you to wait until Labor Day weekend, when the company shuts down for 3 days, giving you time for a proper visit without risking your job. The cross-country journey by bus is a survey of America in the early stages of recovery. Signs of the Depression remain everywhere. Abandoned farms, shuttered factories, men still riding the rails or hitchhiking in search of work. But there are also new sights. CCC camps with young men in uniform building roads and parks, Public Works Administration, PWA projects constructing schools, courthouses, bridges, farmers ploughing fields under government programs. The bus passes through northern Arizona, where Navajo and Hopi reservations have been particularly hard hit. Traditional economies already marginalized by decades of federal policy have been devastated by the Depression. Here, New Deal programs are making little headway, their benefits flowing primarily to white communities. In New Mexico, you see the strange juxtaposition of ancient pueblos and modern conservation projects, CCC workers building flood controls to protect structures that have stood for centuries. Crossing the plains, evidence of the Dust Bowl is inescapable. In western Kansas, the bus drives through a dust storm, not a major black blizzard, but bad enough to reduce visibility to yards, to coat everything inside the bus with fine grit despite closed windows. Faces of farmers visible through the murk are stoic, resigned, as if they've accepted apocalypse as their daily condition. Chicago, when you finally arrive, is both familiar and transformed. The city of your childhood retains its physical shape, its distinctive architecture, its lakefront beauty, but the human geography has changed dramatically. Hoovervilles dot the parks, breadlines circle blocks, factories that once roared with production stand silent. Your parents' modest home in a working-class neighborhood is unchanged, though showing signs of deferred maintenance. The reunion is emotional, your mother crying, your father pretending not to. 4 years of separation, of uncertainty, of worry, dissolved in tearful embraces. They've aged more than time alone would explain. Your father's hair, dark when you left, is now mostly grey. Your mother's face carries new lines, her hands more gnarled from work. The depression has extracted its toll even from those who maintained employment. Over dinner, simple but abundant, clearly prepared with savings and care, they share stories of neighbourhood changes. The Millers next door lost their house to the bank. The Kavanaghs down the street took in relatives from the countryside. The corner store now operates on credit and barter, as much as cash. And Mr. Petrovich, you ask, remembering the stern baker who gave you your first job as a delivery boy. Your parents exchange glances. Killed himself in 31, your father says quietly, after the bank took his shop. The human cost of economic disaster, measured not just in jobs lost and homes foreclosed, but in lives shattered, families separated, suicides, stress-induced illnesses, dreams abandoned. Statistics can't capture the depth of suffering, the psychological trauma of a system collapsing. You share your own journey, New York to Kansas to California to Arizona, the jobs taken and lost, the people met, the scenes witnessed. Your parents listen with expressions mixing pride at your survival and horror at what you've endured. We wanted to send money, your mother says, but we didn't know where you were, and things were tight here too. I know, you assure her. I wouldn't have taken it anyway. Too stubborn. Your father chuckles. Still got that quality, I see. The visit passes too quickly. 3 days of catching up, reconnecting, promising more regular contact in the future. Then it's back on the bus, returning to Arizona, to your job, to the life you've constructed from the wreckage of the crash. As the bus pulls away, your mother waves from the porch, your father standing stoically beside her. You wonder when you'll see them again, or if. They're aging, the world remains unstable despite Roosevelt's efforts. The recovery is fragile, incomplete, potentially temporary. The return journey feels different. Where the outbound trip surveyed an America beginning to heal, the return seems to emphasize how much damage remains, how far the nation still has to go. In Iowa, you pass a farm auction, a family's possessions spread on the yard, their land and equipment being sold to cover bank debts. The family stands to the side, the children crying, the parents stone-faced. It's a scene repeated thousands of times across rural America. At a rest stop in Nebraska, you meet a family travelling west. Father, mother, 4 children crammed into a rusted car with their belongings tied to the roof. The father speaks with a mixture of desperation and hope. Heard there's work in Wyoming, he says. Damn project, government work. You don't have the heart to tell him about the hundreds who line up for each job on government projects, the preference given to local residents, the likelihood of disappointment. Let him keep hope alive a little longer. As the bus crosses the Colorado-Utah border, the driver announces news heard on the radio at the last stop. The National Recovery Administration, NRA, has established new codes for the auto industry, raising minimum wages to 40 cents an hour, reducing the work week to 35 hours, abolishing child labour. Good for workers, good for the economy, declares an older man across the aisle. More money in pockets means more spending means more production means more jobs. Socialism, mutters another passenger. Government telling business what to do. It's un-American. The debate that has divided the nation since Roosevelt's inauguration plays out in microcosm on a Greyhound bus crossing the desert. Is the New Deal a necessary evolution of capitalism or its destruction? Is it temporary emergency measures or permanent transformation? Does it go too far or not far enough? What no one questions anymore is the government's responsibility to act. The laissez-faire approach of the early Depression years has been thoroughly discredited. The debate now is about how to act, not whether to act. As Phoenix appears on the horizon, you reflect on the journey. Not just this bus ride, but the 4 years since the crash. You've traversed the continent, worked dozens of jobs, witnessed suffering on a scale previously unimaginable in America, survived when many didn't. The Depression isn't over. Recovery is partial, fragile, unevenly distributed. Millions remain unemployed, homeless, hungry. The banking system, while stabilized, is fundamentally altered. International trade, crippled by tariffs and nationalist policies, remains far below pre-crash levels. And beyond America's borders, the global consequences of economic collapse continue to unfold. In Germany, Hitler's regime becomes more oppressive by the day. In Japan, militarists gain influence, pushing for expansion. In Spain, political divisions deepen, foreshadowing civil war. The Great Depression has reshaped not just economics, but politics, culture, social relations, individual psychology. It has demonstrated both human vulnerability to systemic failure and human resilience in the face of disaster. What comes next remains uncertain. Will Roosevelt's programs succeed in rebuilding the economy? Will democracy survive the pressures of extremism born from economic desperation? Will nations cooperate to restore international stability or turn inward toward nationalism and conflict? These questions hang in the balance as 1933 progresses, as you return to your job in Phoenix, as the world continues its painful evolution from the catastrophic collapse of 1929. What is certain is that nothing will be the same. The old certainties about markets, about government, about individual responsibility and collective obligation have been irrevocably altered. The world is being remade, for better or worse, in the crucible of economic disaster. Winter 1934 settles over Phoenix with surprising chill. The desert nights drop below freezing, and your boarding house's thin walls offer little protection. You and the other residents gather in the common room at night, sharing body heat and stories. Heard from my cousin in Oklahoma yesterday, says a new resident named Mac, a bricklayer working on a government school project. Says they've had 14 dust storms since January. 14. Can't see the sun for days at a time. The Dust Bowl is intensifying. What began as a curiosity, unusual dust storms in the plains, has become an environmental catastrophe unlike anything in American history. Years of overplowing combined with drought have turned the topsoil of America's breadbasket into a massive cloud of dirt that darkens skies from Texas to Nebraska. My sister sent me this, says Paul, your roommate, pulling a jar from his pack. Inside is nothing but dirt. Fine, almost like talcum powder. Swept it off her kitchen table in Amarillo. Said this much collects every day, even with the windows sealed. You uncork the jar and touch the dirt. It's impossibly fine, like nothing you've ever felt before. This isn't ordinary soil. It's the pulverized remains of farms, livelihoods, communities. There's no stopping it, Mac says grimly. Government's trying, planting trees as wind breaks, teaching different farming methods, but it's too late. That land is dead for a generation, maybe more. The environmental disaster compounds the economic one, creating a wave of migration unlike anything America has experienced. Hundreds of thousands of Okies, though they come from Kansas, Nebraska, Texas, and Colorado as much as Oklahoma, are fleeing west, looking for work, for survival, for escape from the choking dust. Your construction job has remained steady through the winter, though the company now operates differently under New Deal regulations, minimum wage standards, maximum hour restrictions, the end of child labour. The relationship between employers and workers is being fundamentally rewritten by federal mandate. Not everyone is pleased. Your boss, Mr. Sullivan, grumbles constantly about government interference and coddling workers, but he complies because the New Deal works as both carrot and stick, offering federal contracts to companies that follow the rules, shutting out those that don't. The changes are evident across Phoenix. The Public Works Administration is funding a new post office downtown, a school on the west side, improvements to roads and bridges. The Civilian Conservation Corps has camps in the surrounding mountains, employing young men to build fire breaks, trails, and campgrounds. It's far from a complete recovery. Unemployment nationally still hovers around 20%. Breadlines and soup kitchens continue to operate. Hoovervilles remain fixtures in every city, but there's a sense of direction now, of purpose, of systems being built to prevent the worst suffering. February brings alarming news from Europe. Austrian Nazis, emboldened by Hitler's success in Germany, attempt a coup, assassinating Chancellor Engelbert Dollfuss. The coup fails, but only due to intervention from Mussolini's Italy, which fears German expansion toward the Mediterranean. It's coming, predicts a professor who gives weekly talks at the YMCA. Another European war. The Depression has destabilized everything, empowered extremists, left democratic governments weak and discredited. The international news feels distant until a German family moves into your boarding house, refugees who fled Hitler's regime with little more than the clothes on their backs. Heinrich was a lawyer in Berlin, his wife Ava a teacher. Now they work menial jobs. He is a janitor, she as a hotel maid, while struggling to learn English. First, they take Jewish jobs, Heinrich explains one evening in halting English. Then Jewish businesses, then Jewish homes. We see what comes next, so we leave. Their presence makes the European situation visceral, immediate. These aren't just newspaper headlines or radio reports. They're human lives disrupted by the same economic forces that reshaped your own existence. In March, you receive a promotion at the construction company, foreman of the mechanical shop, overseeing repairs and maintenance for the growing fleet of trucks and earth-moving equipment. The pay increase is substantial, 65 cents an hour, nearly double what you made before. For the first time since the crash, you begin to save money beyond an emergency fund. The promotion brings new responsibilities, new challenges. You're supervising men now, some older and more experienced than yourself, making decisions that affect others' livelihoods. One of your first tests comes when a young mechanic named Charlie consistently shows up late, his work sloppy and incomplete. The old you might have fired him immediately. Jobs are scarce, workers replaceable. But something makes you ask questions instead. My wife's sick, Charlie confesses when confronted. TB, I'm up all night with her, then take her to the sanatorium for treatments before work. Pre-depression tuberculosis treatment was expensive but available. Now the public health system is overwhelmed. Treatment facilities have waiting lists. Medications are rationed. Charlie and his wife have fallen through gaps in the safety net, their lives becoming collateral damage of economic collapse. Or start your shift an hour later, you tell him. Make it up at the end of the day and talk to Helen at my boarding house. Her newspaper did a story on a new federal TB program. Might help your wife get better treatment. It's a small act of solidarity, of recognition that survival now depends on mutual support, on bending rules, on seeing the humanity behind economic transactions, the same lessons that Martha taught you in the California fields, that Joe showed you in the Central Park camp. that strangers demonstrated through 100 small kindnesses during your cross-country journey. April brings the worst dust storm yet, a massive front that begins in the plains but carries eastward, darkening skies as far as Washington, D.C., dropping dirt on the White House lawn, coating ships in New York Harbor. They're calling it Black Sunday. Looked like the end of the world for some, reads a letter from your mother in Chicago. Sky turned dark as night at noon. Couldn't see across the street. Everyone thought it was the second coming or worse. The biblical scale of these storms feeds apocalyptic thinking. Preachers claim divine punishment for America's sins. Scientists warn of permanent ecological damage. Farmers abandon generations-old homesteads, loading families into broken-down cars, heading west on Route 66 toward an uncertain future. You see these migrants daily now in Phoenix, drawn by rumours of agricultural work, of New Deal projects, of opportunity. Their cars and trucks piled high with furniture and clothes become familiar sights. License plates from Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas, Nebraska. Hollow-eyed children peering from windows, parents with faces aged beyond their years. Local reaction is increasingly hostile. Arizona workers-only signs appear at job sites. Police harass migrant camps. Politicians demand closing the state borders. "Bunch of damn Okies coming to take our jobs," complains a truck driver in the shop. "Go back where you came from." And where exactly should they go back to? You challenge him. Their farms are gone, blown away. There's nothing left. He has no answer, just mutters something about "not our problem" and walks away. The tension between compassion and self-protection, between recognizing common humanity and fearing for one's own security, plays out across America as the migration intensifies. It's a tension you've seen before in California fields where white workers resented Mexicans, in Kansas rail yards where locals viewed outsiders with suspicion, in 100 communities where scarcity bred distrust. May brings dramatic news. Dust storms have reached the Atlantic, ships reporting dust settling on decks 300 miles offshore. President Roosevelt pushes for the Soil Conservation Act, creating the Soil Conservation Service to combat erosion and develop sustainable agriculture practices. It's part of a second wave of New Deal programs, more ambitious and far-reaching than the first. The Works Progress Administration, WPA, launches, eventually employing millions on public projects, building schools, hospitals, airports, roads, bridges. The National Labour Relations Act guarantees workers' right to unionize and bargain collectively. The Social Security Act creates a permanent system of old age pensions, unemployment insurance, aid to dependent children. These programs represent a fundamental reimagining of government's role in economic life, not just emergency response, but permanent structural change. Critics call it socialism. Supporters call it necessary evolution. Either way, it's a revolution in American governance. In Phoenix, the impact is immediate. WPA projects break ground across the city, employing thousands. Social security offices open, processing applications for the new programs. Labor organizers work openly, protected now by federal law. Your construction company lands more government contracts, expanding operations, hiring additional workers. The mechanical shop grows to 15 men under your supervision. Your wage increases again, 75 cents an hour, more money than you've ever earned. With this newfound stability, you rent a small house near the boarding house, just 2 rooms, but private, your own space for the first time since leaving New York. The furnishings are minimal: a bed, a table, 2 chairs, a radio. But it's yours, a home rather than a temporary shelter. The change feels significant, symbolic. You're putting down roots after years of drifting, making a life rather than simply surviving. You're not alone in this cautious optimism. Across America, people are beginning to rebuild, not to pre-crash prosperity, but to a new stability. Marriage rates increase after years of decline. Birth rates rise slightly. Consumer spending edges upward. Theatre attendance grows. Small luxuries become possible again. But the recovery is fragile, uneven, incomplete. Unemployment remains far above normal levels. International trade is still crippled by tariffs and nationalist policies. Banking, while stabilized, operates under constraints unimaginable before the crash. And beyond American borders, the global consequences of economic collapse continue to unfold in increasingly dangerous ways. June brings news that shocks even a nation accustomed to violence. In Germany, Hitler has conducted a massive purge of his own party. The Night of the Long Knives leaves dozens, perhaps hundreds dead, Nazi killing Nazi in a brutal consolidation of power. This is what economic desperation produces, says Heinrich, the German refugee, when the news reaches Phoenix. Not just poverty, not just hunger, but monsters, men who promise solutions through violence, and people desperate enough to believe them. His words carry special weight coming from someone who fled Hitler's Germany, who saw firsthand the transformation of a democratic republic into a dictatorship. The connection between economic collapse and political extremism, already theoretical, becomes concrete. The summer of 1934 brings intense heat to Phoenix, days above 110 degrees, nights offering little relief. Work at the construction sites slows, shifting to early mornings and late evenings to avoid the worst heat. In the mechanical shop, you institute a rotation system, allowing workers to take cooling breaks every hour. Mr. Sullivan objects initially, lost productivity, coddling workers, but relents when several men collapse from heat exhaustion on the same day. Keep 'em alive? Or keep 'em working, you challenge him. Can't have both in this heat. It's a confidence you wouldn't have had in earlier years, standing up to the boss, advocating for workers. But the New Deal has shifted power dynamics, given Labour a stronger voice, created protections that make such advocacy possible without immediate termination. July brings alarming news from the Midwest. Labour conflicts turning violent. In Minneapolis, striking truckers battle police and company guards. In Toledo, Autolite workers face National Guard troops. In San Francisco, a general strike shuts down the entire city after police kill 2 longshoremen. The strikes represent another aspect of the Depression's impact, the radicalization of American workers, their growing militancy, their willingness to confront both employers and authorities. Years of exploitation and desperation have worn away deference, made conflict preferable to continued submission. The news reaches Phoenix through radio reports, newspaper headlines, letters from relatives in affected cities. Local reactions are mixed, some expressing solidarity with striking workers, others condemning communist agitators, many simply worried about further economic disruption. Your own sympathies lie with the strikers, shaped by years of witnessing exploitation, of being the exploited, but you also recognize the complexity, how strikes can hurt other workers, how violence can alienate public support, how extremist elements can co-opt legitimate grievances. These tensions play out in your own workplace when organisation efforts begin at the construction company. A WPA representative approaches workers during lunch breaks, discussing unionisation, collective bargaining, the protections offered by the National Labour Relations Act. Mr. Sullivan responds with threats. Anyone who signs a union card will be fired, contracts will be lost if wages increase, the company will close rather than operate under union rules. It's a bluff. Firing workers for unionising is now illegal, and government contracts depend on following labour laws, but it's effective at creating fear. You find yourself in a difficult position, sympathetic to the organising effort but responsible for maintaining production as shop foreman. When workers ask your opinion, you're carefully neutral, though you make clear you won't report anyone's union activities to management. August brings personal news that breaks through the political tension. Paul, your former roommate, is getting married. The ceremony will be small at the boarding house where you both once lived, but he wants you as his best man. The bride is a WPA administrator named Margaret who came to Phoenix from Washington to help establish local programs. Their courtship has been brief but intense, a common pattern in uncertain times where traditional extended relationships seem like unaffordable luxuries. The wedding is simple but joyful. A handful of friends gathered in the boarding house parlour, the landlady providing cake, a local minister officiating. Paul wears his only suit, Margaret a blue dress rather than traditional white. Their rings are inexpensive steel rather than gold or silver. Yet there's something beautiful in the simplicity, in the determination to build a future together despite ongoing hardship. It represents a collective decision across America that life must continue, that human connections matter, that the depression can take livelihoods, but not the capacity for joy, for love, for community. The reception afterward becomes a community celebration. Someone produces a record player. Furniture is pushed aside for dancing. For a few hours, the depression recedes, becomes background rather than foreground. You find yourself talking with a young woman named Sophie, a friend of the bride who works as a teacher in a WPA adult education program. Her parents were Italian immigrants, her accent still carrying traces of New York, where she grew up. Came out here for the job, she explains, teaching English to migrant workers, basic literacy to adults who never had proper schooling, pays terrible but works meaningful, you know? You do know that balance between economic necessity and meaningful contribution has become central to many people's recalibration during the Depression. When survival alone is uncertain, purpose becomes more vital, not less. The conversation continues past midnight, meandering through backgrounds, experiences, views on Roosevelt's programs, favourite radio shows, books recently read. It's the longest, most engaging interaction you've had with someone outside work in years. We should continue this sometime, Sophie suggests as the party winds down. Maybe dinner. There's a little Italian place downtown where the cook is from my parents' village, almost like home cooking. The invitation surprises you, not just the specifics, but the very concept of social engagement beyond necessity. The Depression has narrowed life to survival for so long that normal human activities, dates, restaurant meals, conversations without economic subtext seem almost foreign. But you accept setting a date for the following weekend. It's another small step toward rebuilding a life rather than merely surviving, like renting the house, like saving money, like putting down roots in Phoenix. September brings more international news. In Germany, the Nuremberg rally showcases Nazi power with unprecedented spectacle. In Italy, Mussolini prepares for war with Ethiopia, seeking colonial conquest to distract from domestic troubles. In the Soviet Union, Stalin's purges intensify, eliminating real and imagined opposition. The world seems to be dividing into increasingly hostile camps, democracies struggling with economic recovery versus dictatorships embracing militarism and expansionism. The connections to the Depression are direct and undeniable. Economic collapse has empowered extremists, discredited democratic capitalism, pushed nations toward nationalism and aggression. Yet America's path remains distinct. Despite similar pressures, despite radical elements on both left and right, the political system has bent but not broken. Roosevelt's reforms have been revolutionary but constitutional, radical but democratic. The contrast becomes clearer when news arrives of an attempted coup in the United States, the business plot, a supposed conspiracy by wealthy industrialists to overthrow Roosevelt and establish a fascist regime modelled on Mussolini's Italy. The plot, exposed by Marine General Smedley Butler, appears to have been more talk than action, but its very existence is chilling. "Could have gone that way easy," comments a fellow foreman over lunch one day. "People were desperate enough. If we'd gotten a Huey Long type instead of Roosevelt, who knows?" Huey Long, the Louisiana senator whose Share Our Wealth program proposed radical redistribution, has become increasingly vocal in criticizing Roosevelt from the left, pushing for more dramatic action against poverty and inequality. His populist message resonates with millions still struggling despite the New Deal's efforts. The political tensions reflect broader questions about America's future. How much should government intervene in the economy? How should wealth be distributed? What balance between individual liberty and collective welfare? The Depression has forced these questions into public discourse, made theoretical debates immediate and practical. As 1934 progresses toward winter, the recovery continues its slow, uneven pace. The worst seems over, but normalcy remains distant. Unemployment has dropped but remains above 20%. Some industries approach pre-crash production levels, while others languish. Some regions experience growth while others stagnate. For you personally, life has stabilized. Your position at the construction company is secure, your wage is good, your small house comfortable if modest, your friendship with Sophie has deepened, weekend dinners becoming regular, conversations extending into shared activities, hikes in the desert, community concerts, occasional films. It's not the life you imagined before the crash, not New York, not rapid advancement in business, not material abundance, but it has elements absent from those early ambitions: purpose, community, resilience tested and proven. The Depression has reshaped not just economics, but consciousness, individual and collective. Values have shifted, priorities reordered, assumptions challenged. Material success seems less certain, less central. Interdependence is recognized rather than denied. Government's role has expanded not through abstract ideology, but practical necessity. Whether these changes will endure beyond the crisis remains uncertain. Whether the New Deal represents temporary emergency measures or permanent transformation is still debated. Whether democracy can solve the problems of industrial capitalism or will give way to more authoritarian alternatives is an open question. But sitting on the porch of your small Phoenix house as 1934 draws to a close, listening to Roosevelt's fireside chat on the radio, you feel something that's been absent for years. Not optimism exactly, but a cautious faith in possibility, in resilience, in the capacity to rebuild from ruins. The Great Depression isn't over. Its global consequences continue to unfold in increasingly dangerous ways, but its power to destroy has been contained, its worst effects mitigated, its challenges met with creativity and determination, if not perfect solutions. And on an individual level, you've survived. Not unchanged, not unscathed, but intact, carrying lessons that will shape whatever comes next, whatever form recovery eventually takes. 1935 arrives with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. The worst seems over. Bank failures have largely stopped. Industrial production is slowly increasing. Unemployment has dropped from catastrophic to merely severe. But new tensions emerge as Roosevelt's programs face their first serious challenges. In January, the Supreme Court strikes down a key component of the National Industrial Recovery Act, ruling that the federal government overstepped its authority in regulating industries. "So much for the Blue Eagle," remarks a fellow foreman at the construction company, referring to the NRA symbol that had been displayed proudly in compliant businesses across America. The decision represents the beginning of a constitutional showdown between Roosevelt and the court. Additional New Deal programs face similar challenges, raising questions about whether the reforms will survive judicial review. For ordinary Americans, these legal battles have immediate consequences. When the NRA is invalidated, some businesses immediately cut wages and increase hours. Others maintain the standards voluntarily, recognizing the benefits of higher wages for consumer spending and labor peace. Your company falls in the latter category, maintaining wages and hours not from altruism but practicality. Change the rules again and we lose half the workforce, Mr. Sullivan acknowledges grudgingly. Besides, government contracts still require the standards. Your relationship with Sophie deepens through these early months of 1935. Weekend dinners become more regular, conversations more personal. She shares stories of her childhood in an Italian neighborhood in Brooklyn, of her parents' struggles and sacrifices, of her determination to become educated despite cultural expectations that women marry young. "My father wanted me to find a husband at 18, she tells you over pasta one evening. When I said I wanted college instead, he didn't speak to me for a month, but my mother, she'd secretly saved money from her seamstress work, enough for my first year's tuition. And your father came around, you ask." Sophie laughs. "Not exactly, but when I got my teaching certificate and started sending money home during the Depression, suddenly education seemed more practical than he'd thought." These personal histories, how families navigated cultural expectations, economic necessities, individual aspirations, form connections deeper than casual dating. The Depression has made such sharing more common, more necessary. When material possessions are scarce, relationships, memories, and experiences become the true currencies of life. March brings the launch of the Works Progress Administration, the most ambitious New Deal program yet. Unlike earlier efforts focused on specific sectors or temporary relief, the WPA aims to provide meaningful employment for millions across a vast range of projects. Building infrastructure, creating art, documenting history, teaching skills, preserving environments. The impact in Phoenix is immediate and visible. Construction projects break ground across the city, a new library downtown, road improvements, flood control systems along the Salt River. Artists receive commissions for murals in public buildings. Writers document local histories and folklore. Musicians perform free concerts in parks. Sophie's adult education program expands significantly, moving from makeshift classrooms in church basements to dedicated spaces in WPA-built community centers. Her students include not just migrants learning English, but local adults seeking literacy, vocational training, continuing education. "It's not just teaching them to read," she explains excitedly one evening. "It's showing them that learning doesn't stop, that they deserve knowledge as much as anyone, that their minds matter. You should see their faces when they read their first complete sentence on their own." Her enthusiasm reminds you of the Depression's paradoxical impacts, devastating in material terms but transformative in other ways, forcing reconsiderations of value, of purpose, of what constitutes meaningful work and meaningful life. The construction company continues to thrive on government contracts. Your position as shop foreman secure and respected. You're able to send regular money to your parents in Chicago now, even save for what once seemed an impossible luxury, a car of your own. In April, you make the purchase, a used 1931 Ford Model A, not new or flashy, but mechanically sound, and, crucially, yours. The freedom it represents is significant after years of dependence on buses, borrowed rides, and your own 2 feet. Your first real drive is taking Sophie to Tempe for a picnic along the Salt River. The day is perfect, warm but not hot, the desert in spring bloom with unexpected colour. You spread a blanket under a cottonwood tree, share simple food, cheese, bread, fruit, a bottle of wine that represents a genuine splurge. I never thought I'd have this again, Sophie says, gazing at the flowing water, the mountains in the distance. The river, you ask, confused. No. She smiles. Peace, security, the luxury of a day without worry about tomorrow. The sentiment resonates deeply. The Depression's most profound impact hasn't been material deprivation, but psychological trauma, the constant anxiety, the inability to plan, the sense that disaster lurks around every corner. A day without that weight feels miraculous. May brings international news that shatters such peaceful moments. Hitler has publicly renounced the Treaty of Versailles and announced German rearmament. The direct connection between economic disaster and military aggression becomes undeniable. Germany was already secretly rebuilding its military, explains Heinrich, the German refugee, during a dinner at your house where he and Ava join you and Sophie, but now they do it openly, proudly. The Depression made this possible, created the anger, the resentment, the desperate people looking for someone to blame. Could it have happened here, Sophie asks? Could America have turned to a dictator? The question hangs heavy in the air. The business plot, Huey Long's growing populism, Father Coughlin's inflammatory radio broadcasts targeting Jews and foreigners. America has its own demagogues, its own radical movements born of economic desperation. Roosevelt saved you, Eva says quietly. Not perfect, not solving everything, but enough to keep hope alive. Germany had no such leader when we needed one most. The conversation turns to fascism's spread, Italy preparing to invade Ethiopia, Japan expanding in China, right-wing movements gaining strength across Europe. The world seems to be dividing into two camps, one embracing militaristic nationalism as the answer to economic woes, the other struggling to preserve democracy while addressing capitalism's failures. In June, the Wagner Act passes, guaranteeing workers' rights to unionize and bargain collectively. It's another transformation in American labor relations, explicitly protecting activities that were once routinely suppressed by violence. Organizers approach your construction company again, more confidently this time, with clear legal backing. The response from management is less hostile than before, resigned to the new reality. By August, a majority of workers have signed union cards, triggering a representation election that the union wins easily. Your position as foreman places you in a complicated middle ground, part of management but sympathetic to labour. When contract negotiations begin, both sides seek your input, value your perspective as someone who understands both production requirements and worker concerns. The resulting agreement represents a genuine compromise, wage increases and improved safety measures balanced against productivity commitments and a no-strike pledge for the contract's duration. It's not perfect for either side, but workable for both, a microcosm of the broader social contract being renegotiated across America. International tensions continue to build through summer and fall. Italy invades Ethiopia in October, using poison gas against civilians, claiming colonial conquest as a right of great nations. The League of Nations issues condemnations but takes no meaningful action. First Japan in Manchuria, now Italy and Ethiopia, comments Paul during Sunday dinner at his and Margaret's small house. Invade your neighbour, face no consequences. What message does that send to Hitler? The question is rhetorical but prescient. The failure to check aggression in Asia and Africa is establishing dangerous precedents for Europe. Economic nationalism is evolving into military expansionism, with powerful industrial nations seeking resources and markets through conquest rather than trade. Domestically, the Supreme Court continues to dismantle New Deal programs. In January 1936, it strikes down the Agricultural Adjustment Act, ruling that Congress cannot regulate agricultural production. In May, it invalidates the Coal Conservation Act on similar grounds. Roosevelt responds with growing frustration, eventually proposing to expand the Supreme Court, adding up to 6 new justices to overcome the conservative majority. The court-packing plan becomes intensely controversial, seen by supporters as necessary to save the New Deal, and by critics as an attack on constitutional separation of powers. "Never thought I'd see Roosevelt overreach," comments Mr. Sullivan, suddenly supportive of the Supreme Court he previously criticized, trying to change the rules because he's losing the game. "The game is people's lives," you respond. "When the rules protect bank accounts instead of human beings, maybe they need changing." The debate plays out across America as the 1936 election approaches. Roosevelt faces Republican nominee Alf Landon, who opposes most New Deal programs as unconstitutional overreach while offering few alternatives for continued recovery. The campaign becomes a referendum on the New Deal itself, on government's expanded role in the economy, on the shift from laissez-faire individualism to managed capitalism with stronger social supports, on whether the Depression represents a temporary crisis or a fundamental flaw requiring structural change. Your own views have evolved since 1929. The experience of wandering America, witnessing suffering and resilience, working in fields and factories and shops has shaped a perspective more complex than any ideology. You see both the necessity of government intervention and its limitations, both the virtues of free enterprise and its excesses, both individual responsibility and systemic forces beyond individual control. These nuances aren't reflected in campaign rhetoric, which tends towards simplification and demonization. Roosevelt portrays his opponents as heartless defenders of privilege. Republicans portray the New Deal as the road to socialism. The middle ground, pragmatic problem-solving, evidence-based policy, balanced approaches, gets lost in partisan warfare. Despite these polarized narratives, your conversations with Sophie, with co-workers, with neighbors reveal more sophisticated understanding among ordinary Americans. People recognize that complex problems rarely have simple solutions, that trade-offs are inevitable, that dogmatic positions serve political purposes rather than practical needs. In November, the election delivers a decisive verdict. Roosevelt wins in a historic landslide, carrying 46 of 48 states, Democrats expanding their majorities in both houses of Congress. It's an unambiguous endorsement of the New Deal approach, a rejection of pre-crash laissez-faire economics. The day after the election, you propose to Sophie, not with an expensive ring, such luxuries remain beyond reach, but with a simple question during a walk along the Salt River. "I don't have much," you acknowledge. "A small house, a used car, a job that's steady but not spectacular. But if you're willing to build something together," "Yes," she interrupts, smiling through tears. "Yes." The simplicity of the moment, of the commitment, reflects Depression-era values: directness, practicality, recognition that relationships rather than possessions provide true security. You set the wedding for spring, allowing time to save, to prepare, to plan a modest celebration suitable for still challenging times. The final months of 1936 bring implementation of one of the New Deal's most significant innovations, Social Security. The program begins collecting payroll taxes, though benefit payments won't start for several years. It represents perhaps the most fundamental shift in government's role, establishing permanent, universal protection against risks once considered purely individual responsibilities. Or 1% of my paycheck, grumbles a mechanic in your shop studying his reduced wages. Government taking my money to give to someone else? No, you correct him. Government taking your money now to give back to you when you're too old to work, like insurance, except guaranteed. The concept remains controversial, seen as essential protection by some, as intrusive collectivism by others. But the program's basic premise, that industrial society requires mechanisms to manage risks beyond individual control, gradually gains acceptance across political divides. The year ends with America in significantly better condition than when Roosevelt first took office. Unemployment has dropped below 15%, industrial production has returned to near pre-crash levels in many sectors, banking operates under new regulations that have restored basic stability. Social supports prevent the most extreme forms of suffering that characterized the early Depression. Yet complete recovery remains elusive. Millions still lack work. Dust storms continue to devastate the plains. International trade remains far below pre-depression levels. And beyond American borders, the global consequences of economic collapse continue to develop in increasingly dangerous directions. Spain is the next battleground, predicts Heinrich during a New Year's Eve gathering at your house. The Spanish Civil War has broken out between Republican forces and fascist rebels under Francisco Franco, becoming a proxy conflict between democratic and authoritarian visions. Germany and Italy send men and weapons to Franco. Heinrich continues, his accent still present, but his English much improved. They test their armies, their tactics, prepare for bigger wars. The connections between economic disaster and military conflict grow clearer each month. The Depression destabilized the international order, empowered extremists, pushed nations toward nationalism and autarky, created conditions where conquest seems a viable alternative to cooperation and trade. Yet America's path remains distinct, troubled, imperfect, but still democratic, still attempting to solve problems through reform rather than revolution or reaction. The contrast with developments in Europe and Asia becomes starker, the divergence more significant. As 1937 begins, your wedding plans accelerate. Sophie's parents will travel from New York, their first visit west, a journey made possible by Roosevelt's railroad regulations that have made passenger service affordable again. Your parents will come from Chicago, your first reunion since that brief visit in 1933. The ceremony will be at a small church where Sophie sometimes volunteers, teaching English to recent immigrants. The reception afterward at the community center built by the WPA where she teaches her adult education classes. No extravagant dress, no lavish meal, no expensive gifts, but authentic celebration, genuine community, true commitment. In many ways, the wedding represents the personal parallel to national developments, not a return to pre-crash conditions, but adaptation to new realities, finding value in different places, building something sustainable if less materially abundant than once imagined. The Great Depression has permanently altered not just economics but consciousness, individual and collective. Material success seems less certain, less central. Interdependence is recognized rather than denied. Security requires both individual effort and systemic supports. Prosperity must be more widely shared to be sustainable. Whether these insights will survive eventual recovery, whether they'll shape post-Depression America, remains uncertain. The human tendency to forget hard lessons when times improve is powerful. The appeal of individualistic narratives in a culture built on frontier mythology is strong. But sitting on your porch on a cool January evening, discussing wedding details with Sophie, you feel something that would have seemed impossible in 1929, not just hope for personal happiness, but faith in collective resilience, in the capacity to learn from disaster, to build systems less vulnerable to collapse, to balance individual freedom with mutual responsibility. The Depression isn't over. Its global consequences continue to unfold in increasingly dangerous ways, but its power to destroy has been contained, its worst effects mitigated, its challenges met with creativity and determination, if not perfect solutions. And on a personal level, you've not just survived but found meaning that transcends economic conditions, in community, in purpose, in connection. Whatever comes next, full recovery or new challenges, these foundations will remain, shaped by hardship but not defined by it. Spring 1937 arrives with wildflowers blooming across the desert and your wedding just weeks away. The modest house you've been renting now hums with activity as preparations accelerate. Sophie spends weekends sewing her own dress with help from the landlady of your old boarding house. You've built a small table for your home, working evenings in the construction company's woodshop with permission from Mr. Sullivan. "Never thought I'd see the day," Paul jokes while helping you sand the tabletop. "Remember that camp in Central Park? If someone had told you then that in 7 years you'd be getting married in Arizona, would have thought they were crazy," you finish, "or that I was hallucinating from hunger." These reflections on the journey from 1929 to 1937 become more frequent as the wedding approaches, not just your personal journey, but the nation's, the world's, the distance travelled from economic collapse to partial recovery, the lessons learned, the adaptations made, the values shifted. Your parents arrived from Chicago 5 days before the wedding, your father looking older but healthier than during your brief visit in 1933, your mother beaming with joy despite the long journey. They bring news of family and neighbourhood, cousins who found work through WPA projects, neighbours who've kept their homes thanks to federal mortgage protections, churches and community groups that have adapted to new realities. Your cousin Frank's working on the lakefront, your father reports. Parks Department through the WPA, planting trees, building paths, says it's the first steady work he's had since 30. And Mrs. Petrovich reopened the bakery, your mother adds. Small, just her working alone at first, but now she's got 2 helpers, named it after her husband. She doesn't need to explain. The same Mr. Petrovich who took his own life in 1931 when the bank foreclosed. These stories of resilience, of rebuilding from disaster, form a tapestry of national recovery, incomplete, uneven, but real. Not a return to pre-crash conditions, but adaptation to new realities, finding value in different places, building something sustainable if less materially abundant than once imagined. Sophie's parents arrived 2 days later, her father Antonio stern and traditional, her mother Maria warm and emotional. They've never been west of the Hudson, their entire lives contained within New York's Italian neighborhoods. The journey represents both physical and psychological distance traveled. "So this is the desert," Antonio says, looking around skeptically as you drive them from the train station. "No trees, no water. People really live here?" "It grows on you," you assure him, "like New York must have grown on you when you first arrived from Italy." He nods grudgingly, seeing the parallel. New York was also strange at first, but had other Italians, familiar things. Here everything is different. "Not everything," Sophie counters from the back seat, where she sits with her mother. "People still need community, still help each other, still build lives together." These connections across differences, geographical, cultural, experiential, represent another depression lesson. Common humanity revealed through common suffering. Distinctions of region, ethnicity, religion becoming less significant than shared challenges, shared resilience. The wedding day dawns clear and mild, perfect Arizona spring weather. The ceremony is simple but meaningful, held in a small church filled with friends from the boarding house, colleagues from work, students from Sophie's classes, neighbors who've become extended family. You exchange vows written together, reflecting journeys that brought you to this moment. Not just personal journeys, but historical ones. Sophie's parents coming from Italy to build new lives, your own migration across Depression-era America, the shared experience of economic collapse and tentative rebuilding. To find each other in a broken world, Sophie says, her voice steady despite tears, and choose to build something together. This is the greatest act of hope. The reception afterward at the WPA-built community centre is a true celebration. Food contributed by friends, music provided by local musicians who play for the joy of it, dancing that continues until late evening. Not lavish by pre-crash standards, but rich in community and connection in authentic joy. Your father, normally reserved, pulls you aside during a quiet moment. Proud of you, son. Not just this, he gestures towards Sophie, dancing with her mother, but everything, the way you've handled these years, many would have broken. Came close, you admit, more than once. He nods, understanding. That's why I'm proud. Bending without breaking, that's the real strength. The conversation captures something essential about the depression experience. Not just survival, but transformation. Learning to bend without breaking, finding strength in flexibility, in adaptation, in releasing old expectations while maintaining core values. After a brief honeymoon, 3 days in a borrowed cabin in the mountains north of Phoenix, you and Sophie return to normal life, or what passes for normal in 1937. Your jobs, your small house now shared, your community of friends and colleagues and neighbours. But within weeks, concerning news begins to appear. The stock market, which had been recovering steadily, suddenly drops sharply. Unemployment, which had been decreasing, begins to rise again. Industrial production slows, retail sales decline, construction projects are cancelled. What's being called the Roosevelt Recession has begun, a significant downturn within the ongoing depression. The causes are complex and debated. Roosevelt's reduction of government spending in an attempt to balance the budget, the Federal Reserve's tightening of monetary policy, new Social Security taxes reducing consumer spending. Whatever the causes, the effects are immediate and troubling. At the construction company, government contracts are delayed or cancelled. Private projects disappear entirely. By June, Mr. Sullivan is reducing hours, cutting staff, struggling to maintain operations. Not firing you, he assures you during a difficult meeting, but have to cut back to 3 days a week. Maybe less if things get worse. The news hits hard, not just the economic impact, but the psychological blow. After years of gradual improvement, of building security step by tiny step, to face renewed uncertainty feels cruelly unfair. We'll be okay, Sophie says that night, studying household accounts at your small table. My teaching hours are steady. We can cut expenses. We've both lived through worse. She's right, of course. You have reserves now. Skills, savings, community, each other. Not prosperity by pre-crash standards, but far more security than in the darkest days of wandering jobless across America. But the setback raises deeper questions. Is full recovery even possible? Is the economy fundamentally broken, capable only of partial function, of temporary improvements before new collapses? Has capitalism as a system reached inherent limits that no policy adjustments can overcome? These questions circulate not just in your household, but across America as the recession deepens through summer and fall. Unemployment rises from 14% to nearly 19%. Industrial production drops by 30%. The stock market loses 50% of its value from 1937 highs. Roosevelt responds by abandoning budget-balancing efforts, pushing for renewed government spending, recommitting to the principle that recovery takes precedence over fiscal orthodoxy. Congress passes the Emergency Relief Appropriation Act, providing additional funding for WPA projects. The recession becomes another front in the ongoing battle over government's proper role in economic life. Critics claim Roosevelt's policies caused the downturn. Supporters argue insufficient stimulus and premature budget cutting are to blame. The ideological divide that has characterized the entire Depression era deepens further. Through autumn, international news grows increasingly alarming. Japan launches full-scale war against China, capturing Shanghai, committing atrocities in Nanjing. Germany continues rearmament while oppressing its Jewish population through the Nuremberg laws. Italy solidifies its conquest of Ethiopia, joins with Germany and Japan in the Anti-Comintern Pact. These developments feel distant from daily life in Phoenix, but their connections to the Depression are undeniable and frequently discussed. Heinrich and Eva, the German refugees who've become close friends, provide perspective that makes international events visceral, immediate. All from economic disaster, Heinrich explains during dinner at your home one evening. Hitler promised jobs, food, national pride, delivered just enough to keep support, even as he took all freedoms, all decency. Could still happen here, Eva adds quietly. Depression not over. If recession becomes worse, if people lose hope again, the possibility hangs in the air, acknowledged but unspoken, that democracy remains vulnerable to economic failure, that authoritarianism retains its appeal when material needs go unmet, that the civilization you take for granted could collapse if recovery fails. Christmas 1937 is subdued compared to the previous year. Your reduced income means simpler gifts, more homemade items, careful budgeting. Sophie makes preserves from citrus grown in your small yard. You build a bookshelf from scrap lumber, practical presents reflecting renewed austerity. Yet the holiday gathering at your home, friends from the boarding house, co-workers, neighbours, Heinrich and Eva, Paul and Margaret, has a warmth, a genuine connection that no economic statistics can measure. The recession has reminded everyone how fragile recovery remains, how quickly progress can reverse, but also how much deeper security lies in relationships rather than material circumstances. To bending without breaking, Paul raises a glass during dinner, echoing your father's words from the wedding. Everyone drinks to the toast, recognizing its significance, its resonance with shared experience. The new year brings cautious optimism as Roosevelt's renewed spending begins taking effect. Your construction company secures additional government contracts, allowing return to full-time work by February. Sophie's adult education program expands again, adding vocational training for women entering the workforce in greater numbers. The recovery remains fragile, incomplete, but the worst of the Roosevelt recession appears to be passing. The pattern becomes familiar. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Progress interrupted by setbacks but not reversed entirely. Adaptation rather than restoration as the defining feature of economic life. March brings international news that overshadows domestic concerns. Hitler's Germany annexes Austria in the Anschluss, incorporating its German-speaking neighbour without firing a shot. The Western democracies, still struggling with economic recovery, offer no meaningful resistance. Next will be Czechoslovakia. Heinrich predicts grimly. German-speaking areas first, then the whole country. While your leaders talk, Hitler acts. The prediction proves accurate. By September, the Munich Agreement allows Germany to annex the Sudetenland, Czechoslovakia's German-speaking regions, in exchange for Hitler's promise to make no further territorial demands. British Prime Minister Chamberlain returns from Munich declaring, "Peace for our time." Peace? Eva scoffs when the news reaches Phoenix. They give Wolf one sheep, expect Wolf to become vegetarian. This is not peace. This is surrender. The international situation continues to deteriorate through 1938 and into 1939. Germany completes its takeover of Czechoslovakia, directly contradicting Hitler's Munich promises. Italy invades Albania. Japan expands its control in China. The march toward global conflict accelerates while the Western democracies, still recovering from economic disaster, respond with appeasement and delay. Yet domestic recovery continues despite international tensions. By mid-1939, unemployment has dropped back below 15%. Industrial production approaches pre-crash levels in many sectors. New Deal programs, from social security to banking regulations, from labor protections to agricultural supports, have created a framework for managed capitalism that provides greater stability, if not prosperity. Your own situation reflects these national trends. The construction company not only returns to full operations, but expands, opening a second location across town. Your position as shop foreman brings promotion to general manager of mechanical operations, overseeing maintenance for a growing fleet of vehicles and equipment. Sophie's work evolves too, from basic adult education to administration of multiple programs across Phoenix. Her language skills prove valuable with the increasing number of refugees arriving from Europe, needing not just English instruction, but assistance navigating American systems, finding employment, establishing new lives. Your small house gains modest improvements, a proper kitchen remodeled on weekends with help from construction company colleagues, a garden that produces vegetables year-round in Arizona's climate, a spare bedroom that serves as Sophie's office, and, perhaps someday, a nursery. "Not what I imagined when we were younger," Sophie remarks one evening, sitting on the porch watching sunset paint the desert in gold and purple. Before the crash, I mean, had such different pictures of success, of what life should be. Better or worse, you ask, genuinely curious. Your own assessment varies day to day, moment to moment. She considers watching a cactus wren dart between thorny branches. Different, smaller in some ways, bigger in others. Less stuff, but more substance, connection, hard to explain. Material expectations lowered, other values raised, you suggest? Exactly. And not just us. Whole country, maybe world. Depression burned away some illusions. Painful, but clarifying. The conversation captures something essential about the Depression decade, not just economic disaster, but consciousness transformation, material success less certain, less central, interdependence recognized rather than denied, security understood as requiring both individual effort and systemic supports, prosperity seen as needing to be widely shared to be sustainable. Whether these insights will survive eventual recovery, whether they'll shape post-Depression America permanently or temporarily, remains uncertain. The human tendency to forget hard lessons when times improve is powerful. The appeal of individualistic narratives in a culture built on frontier mythology is strong. But sitting on your porch as 1939 progresses, these philosophical questions increasingly give way to more immediate concerns. War, which has seemed a distant threat, an abstract possibility, suddenly becomes concrete reality. September 1st brings news that Germany has invaded Poland, ignoring Western warnings, beginning what will become the Second World War. Britain and France declare war on Germany 2 days later, fulfilling their guarantees to Poland but too late to prevent its swift defeat. The news reaches Phoenix through radio bulletins, newspaper headlines, telegrams from relatives in Europe. The community centre where Sophie works becomes an informal gathering place as people seek information, perspective, mutual support in processing events that seem simultaneously distant and world-changing. "We knew it was coming," Heinrich says during one such gathering, his voice heavy. "Since 1933, every step leading here, depression creating conditions, weakening resistance, making people desperate enough to follow madmen." The direct line from economic collapse to military conflict, from the stock market crash of 1929 to the invasion of Poland in 1939, becomes impossible to deny. The Great Depression has culminated in global war, not as an accident or coincidence, but through clear causal connections. Economic nationalism led to protectionism, led to autarky, led to expansionism, led to conquest. America remains officially neutral as 1939 draws to a close, but few believe this can last indefinitely. Roosevelt begins cautious preparations, increasing military budgets, expanding the draft, providing aid to Britain short of direct intervention. The economy responds with accelerating production, declining unemployment, increasing wages. The irony is bitterly noted that war preparations accomplish what years of peacetime policy could not fully achieve. That economic recovery comes through manufacturing the tools of destruction. That full employment arrives by preparing young men to fight and possibly die overseas. "Never figured it would end this way," Paul comments during Sunday dinner at your home in December 1939. Depression ending because of war, like curing a disease by catching something worse. The observation resonates around the table. The depression isn't over. Not yet, not completely, but its end is becoming visible on the horizon, not through natural recovery or policy intervention alone, but through the massive industrial mobilization that only global conflict seems able to generate. "Worth it?" asks Margaret, Paul's wife, now pregnant with their first child. "Recovery at such a price?" No one answers directly. The question is too complex, too loaded with values, with assumptions, with weighing of different forms of suffering. But Heinrich, who has experienced both economic disaster and fascist brutality firsthand, offers a perspective that silences further debate. "War was coming regardless," he says quietly. "Depression made it inevitable. Question now is not whether price is worth paying, but how to ensure sacrifice has meaning. That better world comes after." As 1940 begins, this becomes the central question, not just for your household, your community, your nation, but for a world poised between economic disaster and military catastrophe. How to ensure that sacrifice has meaning, that better world comes after. The Great Depression's direct economic impacts are fading, gradually replaced by the demands and distortions of wartime production. But its deeper lessons remain about systemic vulnerabilities, about human resilience, about the necessity of balancing individual freedom with collective security, about the fragility of prosperity and the centrality of shared values. Whether these lessons will shape the post-war world, whether the suffering of the Depression decade will produce lasting reforms or be forgotten in new prosperity, remains to be seen. But sitting on your porch as winter stars emerge above the desert, you and Sophie share a quiet certainty that whatever comes next, the experiences of these years have permanently altered not just economic structures but human consciousness itself. And that, perhaps, is the Depression's most enduring legacy. Not just what it destroyed, but what it revealed. Not just what was lost, but what was found within the ruins. Spring 1940 brings change to Phoenix. Subtle at first, then increasingly visible. Manufacturing plants expand operations. Construction accelerates. Help-wanted signs appear in windows that for years displayed only "no jobs available." Military recruiters set up tables downtown. It's not prosperity exactly, not yet, but unmistakable economic activity driven by war preparations, by government contracts for equipment, vehicles, supplies, by European orders for American goods paid for with whatever credit remains available to nations under siege. Your construction company pivots toward military-adjacent projects, expanding an airfield outside Phoenix, building warehouses for equipment storage, constructing barracks for training facilities. The work is steady, the pay better than anything since before the crash. "Ironic, isn't it?" Mr. Sullivan remarks during a site inspection in April. Spent 10 years trying to recover from one disaster, finally succeeding because of another. The observation captures the bitter reality of the Depression's end, not through natural recovery or policy intervention alone, but through the massive industrial mobilization that only global conflict generates. Full employment arrives as a byproduct of preparing for destruction on an unprecedented scale. May brings the German blitzkrieg, lightning war that conquers Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, and finally France in a series of stunning victories. Western Europe, democratic and market-oriented, falls to fascist dictatorship in weeks rather than the years of trench warfare that characterized the previous conflict. They're not stopping there, Heinrich predicts during a community meeting at the centre where Sophie works. Britain next, then east toward Russia, and while America debates, Hitler conquers. The debate over American involvement intensifies as Britain stands alone against Nazi Germany. Roosevelt provides aid through the Lend-Lease program, effectively making the US the arsenal of democracy while maintaining technical neutrality. Isolationists and interventionists battle for public opinion, each claiming to represent true American values. For ordinary citizens, these global events manifest in accelerating economic changes. Consumer goods become scarcer as factories convert to military production. Voluntary conservation programs begin. Metal drives, rubber collection, reduced use of strategic materials. Price controls and rationing are discussed as potential necessities if America enters the war directly. Your own work evolves with these changes. The mechanical shop now services not just construction equipment, but military vehicles sent for repair from nearby bases. Your team expands to 20 men, including several recruited from Sophie's vocational training programs. Older workers transitioning to new skills, women entering traditionally male occupations, refugees bringing technical knowledge from Europe. "Never thought I'd see women as mechanics," comments Frank, your longtime assistant who now manages daily operations while you handle broader coordination. "My mother built artillery shells in the last war," you remind him, "while men fought overseas, might happen again on an even larger scale." The integration of women into the workforce represents another transformation accelerated by crisis. What began as economic necessity during the Depression, women seeking any available income to support families, becomes patriotic duty as war approaches. Old barriers fall not through gradual social evolution but urgent practical need. June brings personal news that overshadows even the international situation. Sophie is pregnant. The announcement comes one evening as you sit on the porch listening to radio reports of German bombers over London. Wanted to be sure before telling you, she explains. Her expression mixing joy and concern. Doctor confirmed yesterday, due around January. The news elicits complicated emotions, happiness, excitement, fear for what kind of world this child will enter. A decade of economic disaster, potentially culminating in global war, hardly seems the optimal environment for beginning a family. Timing could be better, you acknowledge, putting an arm around Sophie. But people have been having babies through the whole Depression, through every war and disaster in history. Life continues, she agrees, has to. Otherwise, what's the point of anything else? The pregnancy brings adjustments to your routines, your plans, your thinking about the future. The spare room that served as Sophie's office is converted to a nursery painted on weekends with help from friends. You take on extra work supervising weekend shifts to save additional money. Sophie continues teaching but reduces administrative responsibilities, focusing on direct classroom instruction. The local community embraces the news with enthusiasm, friends organising a baby shower, neighbours offering hand-me-down cribs and high chairs, colleagues presenting handmade toys and knitted blankets after a decade where collective hardship created deeper connections. This celebration of new life represents hope, continuity, faith in tomorrow despite today's uncertainties. Summer brings further war news, the Battle of Britain raging in the skies over England, Hitler preparing Operation Barbarossa against the Soviet Union, Japan expanding its holdings in Asia while eyeing resource-rich European colonies like the Dutch East Indies. America's economy continues transitioning toward war footing even as official neutrality remains. The first peacetime draft in American history begins, calling up men for military service. Defense spending increases exponentially. Strategic industries receive priority for raw materials, for transportation, for labor. Your construction company now operates almost exclusively on military contracts, building or expanding training facilities, airfields, supply depots across Arizona. The work is plentiful but increasingly regulated, with material allocations, wage controls, production schedules overseen by government agencies created to maximize efficiency. So much for free enterprise, Mr. Sullivan grumbles during a meeting with procurement officers. Might as well be working for the government directly. We are, essentially, you remind him, just with the illusion of independence. This partnership between government and private enterprise, neither pure capitalism nor state socialism but a managed system addressing national needs, represents the culmination of trends that began with the New Deal. Crisis, first economic, then military, has transformed American governance, business operations, labor relations, social supports in ways that would have been unimaginable before the crash. Whether these changes will endure beyond the emergencies that produced them remains an open question, debated in newspapers, radio programs, community meetings, dinner conversations. Will America return to pre-depression arrangements once prosperity returns? Or has a new economic order emerged, more regulated, more security conscious, more collectively oriented? The questions persist as 1940 progresses toward winter, as Sophie's pregnancy advances, as the war in Europe intensifies. In November, Roosevelt wins an unprecedented third term as president, largely on his handling of both the Depression and pre-war preparations. The vote represents continued endorsement of active government, of collective approaches to national challenges, of leadership through ongoing crisis. December brings two significant developments, one personal, one global. Sophie experiences false labour, a frightening episode that resolves without complications but prompts the doctor to order bed rest for the remainder of her pregnancy. You reorganise work schedules, recruit neighbours to help with household tasks, spend evenings reading to Sophie as she rests. Then, on December 7th, the global situation erupts into American life with shocking immediacy. Japan attacks Pearl Harbor, killing thousands, destroying much of the Pacific Fleet, pulling the United States directly into World War II. We knew it was coming, Paul says when you gather with friends to listen to Roosevelt's Day of Infamy speech requesting war declarations. Not exactly how or when, but that we'd be pulled in eventually. America's official entry into the war accelerates transitions already underway. Rationing becomes mandatory rather than voluntary. Production shifts completely to military needs. Conservation becomes patriotic duty rather than economic necessity. The last vestiges of the Depression disappear not through natural recovery but through the artificial stimulus of war mobilization. January 1941 brings the arrival of your daughter, Elizabeth Maria, named for your mother and Sophie's. The birth is difficult but uncomplicated, Sophie recovering quickly, the baby healthy, despite being slightly premature. She has your eyes, Sophie says, as you hold your daughter for the first time. This tiny being somehow both fragile and resilient, and maybe my mother's chin. Definitely your determination, you add as the infant grips your finger with surprising strength, going to need that in this world. The world Elizabeth enters is shaped by both depression and war, materially constrained but rich in community, facing unprecedented dangers but unified in purpose, economically active but focused on necessities rather than luxuries. It's a world where collective effort has largely replaced individual striving as the dominant ethos, where security concerns outweigh freedom maximization, where sacrifice for common good is expected rather than exceptional. Whether these conditions represent temporary emergency measures or permanent societal shift remains uncertain. Whether post-war America will resemble pre-Depression America or something entirely new is actively debated in government offices, factory floors, community centers, family dinner tables. The America I grew up in is gone, your father writes in a letter congratulating you on Elizabeth's birth, not just because of war, but because the Depression changed how we think about everything. Work, money, government, each other. Maybe for the better, time will tell. His observation resonates with your own experience. The sense that beyond economic statistics, beyond policy changes, beyond institutional reforms, the Depression's most profound impact has been psychological and philosophical, a fundamental reassessment of values, of priorities, of what constitutes security, success, community, purpose. As 1941 progresses, these reflections take back seat to more immediate concerns: raising an infant during wartime, managing expanding work responsibilities as military production accelerates, supporting friends and neighbours affected by rationing, conscription, wartime relocations. Your construction company transitions to building infrastructure supporting the war effort, not just in Arizona, but across the Southwest. You find yourself traveling frequently, overseeing mechanical operations at multiple sites, balancing professional demands with family responsibilities in ways that challenge traditional gender roles. Never imagined this arrangement, Sophie admits one evening after you return from a week in New Mexico. She's continued teaching part-time while caring for Elizabeth with help from a rotating network of friends and neighbours. Me working outside the home, you travelling for work, everyone pitching in with the baby. Depression baby, war baby, you reply, watching your daughter sleep peacefully despite air raid sirens being tested outside. She's getting early lessons in adaptation. The observation applies beyond your household to communities, institutions, governance structures continuing to evolve through cascading crises. What began as emergency responses to economic collapse have become standard operating procedures, then foundations for war mobilization, then potential templates for post-war society. By summer 1941, unemployment has effectively disappeared from 25% at the Depression's height to under 1% as wartime production absorbs all available workers. Wages rise, working conditions improve, labour unions gain unprecedented strength as national need for uninterrupted production outweighs traditional management resistance. Yet material prosperity remains constrained despite full employment. Consumer goods are scarce, rationing limits purchases, savings increase by necessity rather than choice. The psychological scars of the Depression persist in spending patterns, in risk assessment, in household financial management, thrift and caution outlasting the economic conditions that produced them. Funny thing, remarks Frank during lunch at a work site in Tucson, finally got steady work, decent pay, but can't buy what I want anyway. Cars rationed, gas is rationed, meat's rationed, money in my pocket but nothing to spend it on. Saving for after though, responds another worker. Got 3 war bonds already, never had savings before in my life. This forced deferred consumption, earning now for spending later, creates potential for post-war boom, but also risks if peacetime production can't absorb pent-up demand. Economists, politicians, business leaders already debate post-war planning even as the conflict expands across Europe, Africa, Asia, the Pacific. The question underlying these debates remains consistent. Will America return to pre-depression arrangements once prosperity returns? Or has a new economic order emerged, more regulated, more security-conscious, more collectively oriented? Will the lessons of economic collapse be remembered when artificial stimulus of war spending eventually ends? By late 1941, your own family has achieved stability that would have seemed miraculous during the Depression's darkest days. Your position managing mechanical operations across multiple construction sites provides steady income above national averages. Sophie's teaching, though part-time while Elizabeth is young, adds supplementary earnings. The small house has gained modest improvements, indoor plumbing upgraded, roof repaired, yard landscaped with native plants requiring minimal water. Not what we dreamed of before the crash, you reflect one evening, sitting with Sophie on the porch as desert sunset paints the mountains gold and purple. Elizabeth sleeps in her mother's arms, oblivious to the world historic events surrounding her infancy, but good in different ways. More real, Sophie suggests, built on something solid, not just money and things, but community, purpose, knowing we can survive when systems fail. The observation captures something essential about depression experiences, not just economic hardship, but consciousness transformation, material success less certain, less central, interdependence recognized rather than denied, security understood as requiring both individual effort and systemic supports, prosperity seen as needing to be widely shared to be sustainable. Whether these insights will endure, whether they'll shape post-war America permanently or temporarily, remains uncertain as 1941 draws to a close. The human tendency to forget hard lessons when times improve is powerful. The appeal of individualistic narratives in a culture built on frontier mythology is strong. But the Depression's legacy, both institutional and psychological, has created foundations for potentially lasting change. Banking regulations that prevent speculation-driven collapse, social security providing basic protection against poverty in old age, labor laws establishing minimum standards for wages, hours, working conditions, recognition that market economies require management to prevent extreme outcomes, that individual freedom functions best within systems ensuring basic security. Beyond policy, beyond statistics, beyond institutional arrangements, the Depression decade has permanently altered how millions understand themselves, their relationships, their place in economic and social systems, not erasing American individualism, but tempering it with recognition of interdependence, not rejecting market economies, but acknowledging their limitations, not abandoning personal responsibility, but placing it within broader contexts of systemic forces beyond individual control. As night falls over Phoenix, stars emerging in desert skies of remarkable clarity, you wonder what world Elizabeth will inherit when peace eventually returns. Not the world that existed before 1929, certainly, that America, prosperous but fragile, individualistic, to the point of delusion, trusting in markets as self-correcting, disappeared into Black Thursday's abyss, into breadlines and Hoovervilles, into dust storms and bank failures. Nor the world of 1941, shaped by emergency responses to cascading crises operating under wartime constraints unified by external threats, that America, fully employed but materially limited, collectively oriented but freedom restricted, purpose-driven but danger-threatened, again when peace returns, when soldiers come home, when factories convert back to civilian production. Something new will emerge, neither pre-Depression nor wartime America, but synthesis incorporating lessons from both, an America shaped by memory of economic collapse and recognition of interdependence, yet still committed to individual opportunity and market innovation. An economy managed to prevent extremes of boom and bust while preserving space for entrepreneurship and personal advancement. A society balancing security and freedom rather than treating them as zero-sum opposites. At least that's the hope cradled as gently as the sleeping child in Sophie's arms. That suffering serves purpose, that hardship teaches wisdom, that civilization learns from its catastrophes rather than simply repeating them in different forms. Whether this hope proves justified remains for history to determine, but sitting on your porch as winter stars wheel overhead, your family safe after years of uncertainty, your community strong after decade of challenges, your nation unified after period of bitter division, you feel something that transcends optimism or pessimism, a quiet faith in human resilience, in collective adaptation, in capacity to rebuild from ruins something better than what came before. And perhaps that's the Depression's most enduring legacy. Not just what it destroyed, but what it revealed. Not just what was lost, but what was found within the ruins. Not just lessons about economic systems, but insights into human nature itself, our vulnerabilities and our strengths, our capacities for both selfishness and solidarity, our ability to bend without breaking when everything we thought permanent proves fragile. As you take Elizabeth from Sophie's arms, carrying the sleeping child to her crib, these reflections blur into something simpler, more immediate: gratitude for having survived, for having found purpose beyond survival, for having built connections that transcend economic conditions. The Great Depression changed everything: economics, politics, international relations, social structures, but its deepest transformations occurred within human consciousness itself, altering how millions understand themselves and their relationships to each other, to institutions, to the broader systems shaping their lives. And as you drift towards sleep in your modest Phoenix home, these transformations, personal and collective, individual and societal, echo in dreams that span from Hooverville to White House, from breadlines to battle lines, from dust storms to factory floors. Dreams of a world forever changed by economic disaster, yet still moving forward, still adapting, still finding meaning within hardship, still building something new from the ashes of what came before.